Chapter 1121. Although it was a centralized interrogation, the weight of Yuan Lin and Mao Song was obviously different. Dongqing Wudi, Wan Qingyun, Hua Jingyang, several counselors almost poured all their firepower on Yuan Lin. The interrogation was not serious in both the occasion and the form. It was arranged in a very comfortable living room, but as time went by, the atmosphere in the living room became more and more depressing and desperate. I didn't force her. The despair in Yuan Lin's eyes grew stronger. It was not that he couldn't bear the pressure, but that he knew very well what it meant. It seemed to be an affair between him and Murong Xiu. But once it was connected with the death of Qin Fangqing and Qin Shi, no one could bear the pressure. A few hours ago, he was still on top of Murong Xiu's body, fantasizing about holding the beautiful lord in Yuzhou. A few hours later, he had fallen from heaven to hell. In particular, Murong Xiu, that bitch, had backstabbed him. Yuan Lin knew very well that he was finished. No matter how Zhongzhou State would deal with him, he would have nothing. Being able to keep his life was already the best outcome. She seduced me. I made a big mistake on impulse. Yuan Lin's slow and trembling voice slowly echoed in the living room. I am responsible for this matter. I have to make a self-criticism to the parliament and deeply reflect on my mistakes. I didn't control myself. No one can resist the temptation. I failed to live up to the training and education of the parliament over the years. You like to make self-criticism. There will be many opportunities in the future. Dongqing Wudi directly interrupted Yuan Lin's almost muttering voice and said calmly, Secretary Yuan, the matter between you and Murong Xiu is not something worth paying attention to. What's truly worthy of our attention is what else you've done behind the scenes of this incident. Yuan Lin's body shook. He looked at Dongqing Wudi blankly and did not speak. How long have you and Murong Xiu been together? Dongqing Wudi asked. 6 days. Yuan Lin was silent for a while and said hoarsely. The living room was slightly quiet for a moment. 6 days? 6 days ago in the afternoon, Qin Shi died in the Qin family's yard. That was to say, on the night of Qin Shi's death, Murong Xiu appeared in Yuan Lin's bed? How impatient were these two people? Ridiculous. Dongqing Wudi shook her head. I know I can't be forgiven for my mistake this time. I'm willing to confess everything I know. But I can guarantee that this is just my personal style and has nothing to do with anything else. I have never done anything to let the Prime Minister down. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him without any expression, then lowered his head and took out a file that he had brought from the army headquarters before he came to the Qin family. The file had been specially encrypted, which meant that only a very small number of people in the entire military could read it. Dongqing Wudi glanced down and said in a calm voice, You can state your opinion, but there are some things we must investigate in detail. First of all, Secretary Yuan, tell me, where were you 26 days ago, between the early morning of December 3rd and 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 4th? Between the morning of December 3rd and 2 o'clock in the afternoon of December 4th. Yuan Lin was a little dazed and confused. He subconsciously whispered, I don't remember. I can remind you. Dongqing Wudi said expressionlessly, that day, you bought a plane ticket to Sinan City, using an alias. Yuan Lin's face suddenly changed. His face suddenly became extremely pale, and his eyes looked more desperate. On December 3rd, he took a plane from Yuzhou to Sinan City, and flew to Nanyun Province with another identity in Sinan City. Then he took a train from Nanyun Province to Tianan. He went to Guanan, Shenyuan City. In the Sky City Club in Shenyuan City, he met Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu, talked about cooperation, and finally returned to Yuzhou on December 4th. How did Dongqing Wudi know these things? Yuan Lin suddenly raised his head, stared at Dongqing Wudi fiercely, and said in a hoarse voice, You monitor me? No one monitors you. You're exaggerating. Dongqing Wudi said in a calm tone. He couldn't admit it, and it was true. No one monitored Yuan Lin, and no one dared to do it. Yuan Lin was Qin Fangqing's secretary, and he was the chief secretary at the level of governor. If the military monitored such a person once he was exposed, it would undoubtedly be an extremely serious incident, which would lead to extremely serious consequences. Even Dongqing Wudi couldn't afford such consequences, because it also violated the most basic principles. In fact, we monitor Li Kuangtu. We also found your whereabouts from Li Kuangtu's whereabouts. Regarding this point, the council had a record of it. Li Kuangtu's identity is sensitive, and we need to determine some of his positions and actions through various channels. This matter has been going on for a long time, and it has always been the responsibility of the 5th Bureau of the General Staff Department. The 5th Bureau was the intelligence department of the military, the so-called Junqing Bureau, which occupied a very important position in the intelligence work of the entire Zhongzhou state. I can prove it. I gave the 5th Bureau the order to monitor Li Kuangtu, and I reported it to the parliament. Next to Dongqing Wudi, Yi Dongxing, the deputy minister of the army headquarters, suddenly said, "You met Li Kuangtu. What did you talk about?" Dongqing Wudi looked at Yuan Lin and continued to ask. Yuan Lin was cold and couldn't speak for a while. In fact, there was a follow-up to this matter. Not long after he met Li Kuangtu also came to Yuzhou and had a face-to-face talk with Chen Fangqing. But Dongqing Wudi didn't mention this matter. Did the people of the 5th Bureau not control the relevant information? Or did Dongqing Wudi know it but deliberately didn't say it? If it was the former, he couldn't explain anything. If it was the latter, he didn't need to explain anything. Obviously, Dongqing Wudi wanted to connect all the things together. If he went deeper into this topic, the most likely complete conclusion was that in order to occupy Murongxiu, he united with Li Kuangtu to kill Chen Fangqing and framed Li Tianlan. And in order to get it done once and for all, on the day of Chen Fangqing's death, he also secretly caused Chen Shi's death, and naturally occupied Chen Shi's wife and all the resources of the Chen family. He had sinister intentions and deserved to be punished. Yuan Lin moved the corner of his mouth, but he didn't say anything in the end. He didn't know what to say. He had nothing to do with Chen Fangqing's death. However, this was something only he himself knew. But in his current situation, anything he said would be weak. At this time, no one would speak for him. Even Guo Wendian wouldn't. Because his affair with Murongxiu was obvious, even Guo Wendian was not sure whether Yuan Lin had acted against Chen Fangqing and Chen Shi on impulse for beauty. If he had no problem, Guo Wendian still had the confidence to persist to the end. But what if there was really a problem, Guo Wendian's tough statement would bring unimaginable trouble to himself and the Prince Group. Before figuring out the cause and effect of the matter, the Prince Group couldn't make a clear statement. At most, they would oppose some results, but such opposition was destined not to be too tough. Moreover, the special intelligence of the military had always been very special. There were some things that, except for Dongqing Wudi, Yi Dongxing and a few others, even the president didn't know, such as Yuan Lin's secret appointment with Li Kuangtu and the secret talk between Li Kuangtu and Chen Fangqing. Yuan Lin wasn't sure if Dongqing Wudi and Yi Dongxing knew that Li Kuangtu and Chen Fangqing had met, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that as long as he kept this matter under wraps and only mentioned his meeting with Li Kuangtu in Xinyuan City, then it would be impossible to explain. In order to possess Murongxiu? This motive was indeed a little weak. But what if it was to possess Murongxiu and monopolize the resources left by Chen Fangqing? This was very realistic. Yuan Lin's identity was sensitive. When Chen Fangqing died in incomparable humiliation, and then Chen Shi died inexplicably, as long as someone took the blame for their deaths, the Chen family would be taken care of to the greatest extent. In other words, as long as the parliament believed that it was Li Tianlan who did it, the Chen family would certainly get support from all aspects of the parliament, and the one who benefited the most was naturally Yuan Lin. This was the righteous resource left by Chen Fangqing after his death, and this resource, the most conservative estimate, could push him into the parliament of Zhongzhou state 5 years later. In this way, this motive was sufficient. And his secret appointment with Li Kuangtu could naturally be inferred that he wanted to use Li Kuangtu as a knife. Chen Fangqing and Chen Shi died strangely. Everyone thought that Li Tianlan killed them in some way of martial arts. If Li Tianlan could do it, Li Kuangtu, who also stood at the peak of martial arts in the dark world, could naturally do it. The motive and the means of killing seemed to be available. Li Kuangtu's promise to cooperate meant that Yuan Lin had given the other party an irresistible reward. As Chen Fangqing's secretary, Yuan Lin had mastered countless information. What did he give Li Kuang to? Was this treason? His thoughts kept diverging. Yuan Lin's eyes went black for a while. Countless crimes seemed to be constantly pinned on his head in front of his eyes. He was extremely sad to find that at this moment, he didn't even have the slightest room to resist. When all the chains of evidence pointed to him, there would be countless people in the dark cooperating tacitly to make this chain of evidence seamless. It never mattered what the real truth was. What mattered was what people were willing to believe and accept the truth. So, Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice, Li Kuangde has a direct relationship with the death of the Prime Minister, right? Yuan Lin was shocked. He knew that it was very likely that there was no turning back, but this concerned his life, so he had to struggle no matter what. However, just as he was about to retort, a hoarse voice rang out. That voice was incomparably tired, incomparably numb, and filled with intense bitterness. No, not only Li Kuangtu, everyone was stunned for a moment. Even the few directors subconsciously turned their gazes away from Yuan Lin and shifted their gazes to on Mao Song. Chapter 1122. The order of the previous chapters is wrong. Well, the content is correct. Sorry. Mao Song? Dongqing Wudi's eyes narrowed subconsciously. Others' eyes were a little blank. Those who could enter this living room to participate in this special interrogation were at least governors. There was only one such person, and that was Ma Si, Li Huaqing's secretary. In addition to Ma Si, all the people here were members of parliament and directors who could be called leaders of Zhongzhou state. They were not very familiar with Mao Song. Chen Shi's secretary was far from worthy of their attention at this stage. Mao Song's future may be very promising, but when Chen Shi hasn't truly fulfilled his potential, these real executives naturally won't bother to study his secretary. Therefore, although he was also brought to the interrogation room, basically no one paid attention to him. Everyone's attention was focused on Yuan Lin. As for Mao Song and Chen Yao, it was completely irrelevant. Mao Song was not qualified enough. Chen Yao was not as good as Murong Xiu. The value of his existence was at most a bargaining chip to be sacrificed. This was his fate. Mao Song was also very clear about his fate. Dongqing Wudi had led the direction of the conversation and completely forced Yuan Lin into a desperate situation. Unless there was a big accident, it was not hard to imagine Yuan Lin's fate. With Yuan Lin's fall, Mao Song also knew his fate. All of his duties and the future he had been looking forward to would come to naught. All of his deeds would be clearly investigated, and his family would be implicated. As for himself, it was highly likely that he would be secretly executed or locked up in a secret prison until his death. This was the result of being implicated by Yuan Lin. The leader of the Prince Group might try his best to protect Yuan Lin, but no one would protect him, because he was not qualified or important. So from Mao Song's point of view, if he did nothing, no matter what happened to Yuan Lin, his fate would be extremely miserable. He could not put his hope on the Prince Group. Everyone knew that it was impossible. The only way was to save himself. It could be said that he gave up on himself or tried to save himself. The only thing he was glad about was that he had enough bargaining chips. It was a bargaining chip that could pin Yuan Lin, and even many others, to the ground. He could follow the direction of Dongqing Wudi's conversation and block all possible doubts. So he took the initiative to speak. The phrase, not only Li Kuangtu, had a rich meaning. It was tantamount to indirectly admitting his crimes on behalf of Yuan Lin. At the same time, it also meant that there were many inside stories that others did not know. Mao Song, what nonsense are you talking about? An incomparably low and stern voice rang out. Beside Yi Dongxing, a middle-aged man with a dignified and calm appearance suddenly slammed the table. You have to understand your own situation. Don't make wild accusations. You have to be realistic. Mao Song looked at him expressionlessly and suddenly sneered, Minister Yang, I can be responsible for every word I say. Yang Jianghu. He was one of the current leaders of the Prince Group, the current member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State, and the first deputy minister of the Ministry of Supervision. After the general election next year, Yang Jianghu was very likely to become the new director candidate of the Prince Group. The moment Mao Song opened his mouth, the warning he issued did not match his identity, but it was definitely in line with his position. Yuan Lin alone had already caused the Prince Group a lot of trouble. At this time, why did Mao Song come to join in the fun? Whether what Mao Song said next was the truth or a fabrication, Yang Jianghu did not want him to continue. He just wanted this matter to calm down as soon as possible. Fellow wise man in Jianghu, watch your attitude and words. Wan Qingyun, the Minister of Supervision who had been silent, frowned and said in a cold voice, whether what Mao Song said is true or not, we will investigate according to what he said, not stop him from speaking. Dongqing Wudi slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at Mao Song, his eyes a little flickering. Among these people present, he was probably the only one who had been paying attention to Mao Song. Even when he was interrogating Yuan Lin, he did not miss the change of Mao Song's expression out of the corner of his eye. Because Li Tianlan made it very clear that the turning point of this matter did not lie in Yuan Lin, but in Mao Song, who no one had paid serious attention to. Dongqing Wudi was originally thinking about how to shift the topic from Yuan Lin to Mao Song, but he did not expect that Mao Song had already taken the initiative to speak. Dongqing Wudi was a little surprised, but he did not show it on his face. He looked at Mao Song and said calmly, "What do you know?" "I know a lot of things." Mao Song's eyes were a little hollow, but with these strange hopes. Yang Jianghu wanted to say something but did not speak in the end. He just looked at Mao Song full of warning. Dongqing Wudi nodded and said expressionlessly, "Go ahead." Ma Si, who was at the lowest level here, picked up a pen and began to make notes. Mao Song looked straight at Dongqing Wudi for a long time. He seemed to be hesitating, and finally took a deep breath and said slowly, "No, Minister Dongqing, if possible. I want to talk to you alone." Yang Jianghu moved his lips as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he did not speak. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while and nodded. He stood up and pointed to a small lounge next to the living room. "Come with me. Minister, Mao Song is in danger now. No one can guarantee that he will not do anything extreme. Your safety." Yang Jianghu finally spoke, but he automatically shut up halfway. His expression looked a little embarrassed. In a hurry, he felt like an idiot for saying what he subconsciously said. Everyone looked at him as if he were an idiot. Worried about Dongqing Wudi's safety? It was a complete joke. In recent years, after Dongqing Wudi entered the army headquarters, his reputation had been silent in the dark world for a long time. But it was just that he was not mentioned. It did not mean that he would be forgotten. Dongqing Wudi, known as the god of massacre in Zhongzhou State, was still on the list of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State. He could be said to be the top figure in Jade Pool today. Mao Song could threaten his personal safety unless he was a hidden expert of the invincible realm. No, Li Tianlan was still here. The young Dongwang sword energy was so strong that it was everywhere. Even if Mao Song was an expert of the invincible realm, it was impossible for him to threaten Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi smiled casually and said nothing. He took Mao Song directly into the small reception room next to him. The door of the reception room slowly closed, blocking everyone's sight. "Sit down," Dongqing Wudi said slowly. Now he sat down on the sofa. Mao Song sat opposite Dongqing Wudi in silence, as if thinking about something. Dongqing Wudi took out a pack of cigarettes without any anxiety. After taking one out and lighting it, he pushed the pack toward Mao Song. He could see the mental pressure Mao Song was under at this time, but he could also see Mao Song's determination. In fact, from the moment Mao Song opened his mouth, the nature of this matter seemed to have been doomed. Mao Song took out a cigarette, lit it, and took big, almost greedy puffs. If nothing had happened today, he should have been smoking at this time, holding the beautiful woman of the Chen family in his arms. But now, Mao Song gave a wry smile and spat out the smoke. He looked up at Dongqing Wudi and was silent for nearly half a minute. Then he said in a low and hoarse voice, "Minister, I want a chance to live." Dongqing Wudi seemed to be a little surprised, but also not surprised. He raised his eyebrows and did not speak. Mao Song held the cigarette between his fingers. Amidst the lingering smoke, his gaze became a little erratic. "I've never suffered much since I was young. I was basically spoiled since I was young. My parents are ordinary workers and my family isn't considered rich, but I've never lacked anything compared to others. My childhood and adolescence were very stable, and I worked hard in college. I was admitted to the city hall, and by chance, I became Governor Chen Shi's secretary. In many people's eyes, even in my own eyes, my luck is very good. Dongqing Wudi looked silently at Mao Song, who was muttering to himself, without saying a word. I have made a lot of mistakes over the years. I like money and women, and I have done a lot of things that I shouldn't have done. Many times, I think that I am indeed a person with poor self-control. The only redeeming feature may be that I am sober and cautious enough, so I have not had an accident until today. My family, no, it can be said to be a family. My family lives well under my care. After so many years, I am used to the present life, and so is my family. I think if such a life suddenly encounters an accident, my family will not be able to live, and so will I. Minister, I want to live well, away from Jingji and even away from Zhongzhou State. His voice was low, but it was getting calmer and calmer. Dongqing Wudi looked at him for a long time, and then said with no expression, "Before there is a clear result, I can't give you any promise." Mao Song laughed, and his smile was extremely sincere. "Minister, I can promise you that I can give you a very satisfactory result." At this moment his mind was extremely clear. He knew what he was doing. To be exact, he was now begging for mercy from Dongqing Wudi and Li Tianlan. They were indeed enemies to some extent. But when his own people could not care about him, begging for mercy from the enemy was the only thing he could do, and it was also the only hope for his survival. Everyone could see the strength of Emperor Dong's palace. Now, when Li Tianlan was under great pressure, Mao Song could give him enough chips to turn the tables. What he wanted was just a good life in the future. That was all. The giant group would not care about his life or death. People like Li Tianlan and Dongqing Wudi would not care about his life or death. It was just a word to let him die. It was also just a word to let him live. Mao Song suddenly had a little more confidence in the next deal. Dongqing Wudi nodded, took out another cigarette and lit it up. "Go ahead. What do you know?" The air in the small reception room suddenly surged quietly, stirring up the smoke in the room. The air was slightly distorted. An incomparably gorgeous black windbreaker was outlined in front of the two little by little, and gradually became clear. Mao Song suddenly stood up, and with fear and panic in his voice, he trembled and bowed his head. "Your Majesty." Li Tianlan, in the black windbreaker, stood motionless, silently, and did not hide anything. Dongqing Wudi clearly felt the full sword energy under the windbreaker. The majestic sword energy outlined Li Tianlan's face, but in fact, it was just a ruthless face that had recovered some energy. Dongqing Wudi nodded to him, took a drag on his cigarette, and looked at Mao Song. "Tell us everything you know. I'm not sure if the purgatory of Heaven Capital has a direct relationship with the death of the Prime Minister." Mao Song whispered. Ruthless stood silently in front of Mao Song, motionless, like a statue without the slightest vitality. Dongqing Wudi quietly hummed and waited for him to continue. "If your Majesty and the minister want this result, I can testify against him." Mao Song continued. "Is that what you want to say?" Dongqing Wudi suddenly asked. What he wanted was some kind of evidence, not evidence, especially from Mao Song. Such evidence was obviously not enough. More than that. Mao Song thought and simply followed Dongqing Wudi's meaning. It was not only Li Guangtu who killed the Prime Minister, but also Jiang Shangyu. The sword energy in the reception room fluctuated for a moment for no reason. The black windbreaker fluttered gently. When Mao Song said Jiang Shangyu's name, Ruthless seemed to lock onto something. At this moment, it gave Dongqing Wudi a very clear thinking emotion, or it was searching for something. "Jiang Shangyu," Dongqing Wudi murmured to himself and narrowed his eyes. At this moment he suddenly realized that maybe he would get unimaginable gains from Mao Song, who no one paid attention to. Dongqing Wudi took the initiative to hand Mao Song a cigarette and said flatly, "Go on. What I can be sure of at present is that the death of Governor Chen Shi is directly related to Jiang Shangyu, and I can show evidence." What evidence? Dongqing Wudi's eyes gradually lit up. Some recordings and myself. Mao Song gave a wry smile. Dongqing Wudi was silent for about 10 seconds. His body slowly leaned on the sofa and he said calmly, "You mean you killed Qinshi?" "I didn't want to kill him myself." Mao Song whispered, "Jiang Shangyu gave me a kind of medicine, which looked a bit like four-leaf grass. He told me to crush this leaf into powder and give it to the governor. I gave the governor 3 leaves and the last one is with me now." According to what Jiang Shangyu said at that time, the governor would not die directly because of this, but he would have a very strong hallucination, so he would do something extreme to His Majesty Li Tianlong. In this way, the governor was likely to die directly in the hands of His Majesty Li Tianlong, which would further prove his guilt. Even if His Majesty restrained himself at that time, the governor would become insane because of the strong hallucination and even attack the people around him. In this way, he was likely to be killed by the guards around the directors. In the autopsy report after his death, it was easy to give the conclusion that the governor had been hypnotized at that time. Then, Jiang Shangyu would expose the fact that Patriarch Qin Weibai was good at hypnosis in the spiritual domain, which would not only put more pressure on His Majesty, but also drag the Lin clan into trouble. He said numbly, and at the same time, he took out a small green leaf from his pocket. The leaf was in a transparent fresh-keeping bag. Mao Song put the leaf in front of Dongqing Wudi and whispered, "Jiang Shangyu gave it to me, and so did the fresh-keeping bag. There should be his fingerprints on it." Dongqing Wudi, whose heart was in turmoil, restrained his expression and just asked, "In addition to the possible fingerprints, what other evidence do you have?" "Recording. There is a USB flash drive in my room, hidden under the bed and glued to the bedboard. It should not have been destroyed." A black shadow instantly separated from Wu Qing's body and rushed out of the reception room. Mao Song merely blinked his eyes and the black silhouette once again merged with Wu Qing. A black USB flash drive appeared on the coffee table, still spinning and shaking slightly. Dongqing Wudi and Mao Song's eyes fell on the USB flash drive at the same time. Mao Song was stunned for a moment, nodded slightly and whispered, "That's it." There was no equipment to play the recording in the reception room, so Dongqing Wudi carefully put away the USB flash drive. "How did Jiang Shangyu get in touch with you?" Dongqing Wudi asked. "Through the shade." Mao Song told him everything he knew, and every word was true. What he said was the truth, so it was particularly logical. "The shade is in the Phoenix Pavilion, codenamed Red Snow." Dongqing Wudi was a little confused and asked, "What is the Phoenix Pavilion? Who is Red Snow?" The Phoenix Pavilion is a secret organization of Kunlun City. Mao Song laughed in a low voice. "It is also the core organization of Kunlun City. I don't know how long this organization has been established, but it is certain that the existence of this organization weaves an unimaginable network for Kunlun City. The members of the Phoenix Pavilion are all different women and men of various styles. The members are very mixed, which means that the coverage is very wide. University belles, teachers, policemen of Zhongzhou State, female officials, young women from rich families, daughters of rich families. Oh, there are all kinds of people in it. I can roughly understand some of the operating processes of the Phoenix Pavilion. There are 4 very important departments inside the Phoenix Pavilion. One is called the Observation Office, one is called the Analysis Office, and one is called the Executive Board. The last one is the Training Department. The Observation Office is the peripheral force of the Phoenix Pavilion, scattered in various places, regions, and industries in Zhongzhou State. Most of them have their own jobs to disguise. Their most important task is to target some talents with sensitive identities, great value, and amazing potential, including but not limited to high officials, rising stars, financial tycoons, and so on. The Observation Office will regularly make a list, summarize it annually, and then delete some that are not so reasonable. After finalizing a final list, it will be submitted to Kunlun City. This list will be transferred to the Analysis Office. The Analysis Office can combine the intelligence of Kunlun City to deeply analyze the role each candidate can play at present, the height he may reach in the future, the resources he controls, and so on. It is impossible for the observation office to get the intelligence of Kunlun City. Relying on this intelligence, the analysis office simplifies the list provided by the observation office and forms the final list. The final list will be transferred to the executive board, which is mostly made up of the elites of various special operations bureaus in Zhengzhou State. They will conduct the most detailed investigation on everyone on the list, such as their character, taste, hobbies, schedule, ideals, marital status, family relationship, and the opposite sex they like. They can even investigate their previous friends of the opposite sex and their current wives or husbands, understand the reason for their breakup, understand the couple's conflicts in their current lives, and so on. All the details are within the scope of the executive board's investigation, even down to what brand of toilet paper they like. The executive board will eventually produce a detailed investigation report and transfer it to the training department. Based on the investigation report, the training department will screen candidates in the Phoenix Pavilion who meet the target's taste. For example, Mao Song paused and then smiled with some complexity. For example, me. I like to be quiet and reserved. It's best if she has an oval face, long hair, big eyes, a pair of slender, beautiful legs, good personal culture, has received higher education, loves music and classical dance, and is 1.7 to 1.75 meters tall with a decent job. The observation office will put my name on the observation list and send it to Kunlun City in the summary. Kunlun City will hand over the list to the analysis office. My name will be confirmed after combining various analyses. Then the executive board will use various ways to learn all kinds of information about me, and finally form an investigation report and send it to the training department of Phoenix Pavilion. The training department will select suitable candidates from various groups in the Phoenix Pavilion. My preference is relatively simple and easy to satisfy. But if the opposite sex I dream of doesn't exist in the Phoenix Pavilion today, then the investigation report about me will be transferred to the observation office again, and the observation office will start to mobilize resources, such as the police department and the resources of various special operations bureaus, to find and lock the target for me all over the country and even the world. After the target is locked, it will be transferred to the executive board again, which will make a detailed action plan. It will use various means to get the target to the Phoenix Pavilion, and then join the training department for special training and brainwashing for a long time. When the other party's training and brainwashing are all qualified, the trainee will be transferred to the executive board again, and the people of the executive board will arrange various accidents and occasions to let her appear by my side smoothly. Such a candidate will basically be the lover I dream of. There is almost no error. Her existence perfectly matches all my fantasies about the opposite sex. She targets my weakness and makes me almost unable to resist. I will completely fall for her in a very short time. In this way, I will have a chess piece of Kunlun City by my side. When she gains all my trust, the executive board will make the next plan. If everything goes well, I will also become a chess piece of Kunlun City. At least, I can become a force that Kunlun City can use. Mao Song said and lit another cigarette. He smoked silently. After a long silence, he suddenly laughed and said, "Of course, this sounds a little troublesome, but this is a special case. Most people don't have two impossible requirements for their dream lover. The various women in the Phoenix Pavilion are enough to deal with most situations. After joining the training department, they can perform long-term tasks after short-term training. Unless there is a particularly valuable target, Kunlun City will spend a lot of manpower and material resources to tailor a dream lover for the target." Phoenix Pavilion. Kunlun City. The calmness on Dongqing Wudi's face had completely disappeared, leaving only solemnity. Kunlun City had only appeared in Zhengzhou State for more than 20 years. But the Gu family, which had struggled under the majesty of the Li family, had a very long history. So, strictly speaking, how long had the Phoenix Pavilion, which belonged to the Gu family, existed? If such an organization really existed, to what extent would it have developed in Zhengzhou State now? How many people are there in the Phoenix Pavilion? Dongqing Wudi asked in a low voice after thinking for a while. "I don't know." Mao Song smoked and shook his head. There shouldn't be many formal members who are in a state of no task. Most of them have formal and long-term tasks. But what is certain is that, in addition to those departments, there are at least 6 large groups in the Phoenix Pavilion. In addition, there are at least 3 schools behind the Phoenix Pavilion that specialize in training all kinds of talents. Is there such a school? Will anyone choose to sign up? Dongqing Wudi's worldview was severely shocked. He had been in the Border Control Corps all year round and had been dealing with soldiers for most of his life. In his mind, the Phoenix Pavilion was simply a place to train senior girls. A school set up in such a place? Would anyone sign up? I can tell you for sure that at least 3 of the schools are overcrowded. Mao Song smiled. In this day and age, there are still a lot of good girls, but there are also a lot of girls with distorted values. There are even more beautiful and scheming girls who want to marry into a rich family. Some girls even share second-hand designer stockings with other girls in order to marry into a rich family. In order to get in and out of various so-called high-end occasions, they would rather squeeze dozens of people into a luxury hotel suite just to take a selfie to pretend to be a so-called socialite. In a high-end restaurant, more than 10 people have to pay for a cake together. They take turns to take photos, and they have to be slapped for every bite. Oh, humble and pitiful things. Compared with them, the Phoenix Pavilion can be said to be a paradise. At least the people in the Phoenix Pavilion, although the mission they undertake is contemptible, at least they are like human beings. As long as they can walk out of the Phoenix Pavilion, it means that they can definitely appear beside some big shot. As long as they work hard, they don't lack money or power. They can live a luxurious life, have luxury cars, watches, and houses. Maybe they can't see the light, but they live a life that most materialistic girls are incomparably envious of. For this kind of life, many girls are willing to give up everything. Even if it's a school secretly run by the Phoenix Pavilion, not just anyone can enter. First of all, there are very clear and rigid requirements for academic qualifications, height, appearance, and body proportions. Secondly, there are past love lives. It's best if you're pure and unblemished. If you're not, then you can't have a private life that's too messy. In addition, there are questions about interests, hobbies, personality, and so on. In short, if you want to enter that school, the tests in all aspects are no less than a top-notch interview. After receiving an official invitation letter, the tuition fee would be completely free, and accommodation would be provided. The school would also introduce decent and leisurely jobs to the students outside of the curriculum. In addition to that, there would also be a subsidy from the school. Every official student would receive at least a 5-digit income every month after studying. There will be an internal assessment every year, and some people will be persuaded to quit. Those who pass the test but don't meet the requirements of the Phoenix Pavilion will also be divided into different levels. They will be placed on a list 1 level lower, or enter various departments of the Phoenix Pavilion, and their income will at least double. The current Phoenix Pavilion is not only a huge network of relationships, but also a very complete and hidden industrial chain, which is full of temptations and desires. The highest level members they attract. Mao Song suddenly fell silent. Dongqing Wudi, who looked extremely solemn and a touch of hatred, frowned and said in a low voice, "Go on." The highest level member they attract has reached the level of a member of parliament, but I don't know who he is. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a long time and did not speak. He was silently digesting the information Mao Song said. If the Phoenix Pavilion really existed and had developed for many years, then how much hidden power did Kunlun City and the Special Warfare Group have now? According to Mao Song, the existence of the Phoenix Pavilion must consume a lot of money every year or even every day for various expenses. In addition to other expenses, where did Kunlun City get the money to support the Phoenix Pavilion? Should I check the financial situation of the Special Warfare System? Dongqing Wudi thought silently, and a doubt naturally came to his mind. He glanced at Mao Song and asked, "How do you know these things? Besides, we seem to be talking about Jiang Shangyu." "This is one thing." Mao Song's voice was flat as he said, "Hong Shui told me this yesterday. Her real name is Lin Yin, and she belongs to the Phoenix Pavilion's 6th group, the Azure Phoenix Group. She's also the woman of my dreams that the Phoenix Pavilions secretly arranged for me. She's been with me for many years and has developed feelings for me. That's why she told me these secrets. In addition to being an elite cultivated by the Phoenix Pavilion, she is also one of Jiang Shangyu's pawns. A long time ago, at least 10 years ago, the Jiang family in Beijing began to slowly infiltrate the Phoenix Pavilion. Hong Shui is now in Building 11 of the Ants Villa district in Yuzhou. The minister can send someone to bring her here for evidence now. In addition, Hong Shui's immediate boss, Lu Dongyue, the leader of the Green Phoenix Group, is now in Nanyun Province. On the surface, he is the director of the 6th Division of the Nanyun Special Operations Bureau, but in fact, he is the main person in charge of the Phoenix Pavilion in Nanyun Province. At the same time, he is also one of the 3 main executives of the Phoenix Pavilion in the southwest region of Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Wudi quickly took out his mobile phone and sent 2 text messages. He arranged for someone to control Hong Shui and Lu Dongyue as soon as possible. The villa area where Hong Shui lived was not far from here and the army headquarters. He could get it done as soon as he sent the text message to Bai Qingzhao. As for Nanyun, although it was a place where the Prince Group had a deep influence, it was also a place where Dongqing Wudi had a deep influence. More than 100,000 troops of the Blood Battalion of the Border Control Corps had always been stationed there. If necessary, as long as Dongqing Wudi gave the order, more than 100,000 troops would be enough to surround the Special Operations Bureau of Nanyun Province in the shortest time. After doing all this, Dongqing Wudi subconsciously raised his head and glanced at Wu Qing. Wu Qing was still standing quietly, but he turned around and was staring at the leaf in a fresh-keeping bag on the table, as if he was thinking about something. Dongqing Wudi had intended to get up and call Yi Dongxing and the others in to make a record, but after thinking about it, he didn't move. He took a deep look at Mao Song and said slowly, "Do you have anything else to say?" It had to be said that if Mao Song's words could be confirmed, then the pressure on the giant group and the new group would dissipate by more than half in the shortest time. What Mao Song said could be said to be full of sincerity, which completely gave Li Tianlan the bargaining chip to turn the tables in a desperate situation. Compared with this bargaining chip, what Mao Song said about wanting to live, or even living a better life, was completely insignificant. That's all I know, and that's what you can find out in the shortest time. As for what happens after that, you have to dig deeper. Mao Song shook his head and said softly, "But Jiang Shangyu is very ambitious. Red Snow told me that he and Gu Xingyun seem to have cooperated. No one knows how many things he has secretly planned. First, he wooed me, then Yuan Lin or Yuan Lin, then me. Then, at the most suitable time, he killed the Prime Minister and the Governor through us and put the blame on His Majesty Li Tianlan. His plot must be beyond the imagination of ordinary people. I suggest that the Parliament investigate Jiang Shangyu, and even the whole Jiang family in Beijing." "We will do it." Dongqing Wudi smiled. His mood had completely improved in Mao Song's constant narration. The cooperation between Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu was already a well-known thing. In the decisive battle in Beihai, the two of them advanced and retreated together could fully explain the problem. And from Mao Song, he got the news that Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu cooperated. That was to say, Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, and Jiang Shangyu, the 3 of them actually got together? If it was in normal times, it would undoubtedly be a very serious matter, especially for Li Tianlan. But now, with Mao Song's confession, his clue suddenly connected Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu. The Phoenix Pavilion was a ghastly sight. The insidious and cunning Jiang Shangyu. The patient and dormant Li Guangtu. The storm was about to rise in Zhongzhou State. When the storm ended, what would the former Kunlun city and the former purgatory of Heaven capital look like? And what kind of height would the rising new group and Emperor Dong's palace reach in this storm? Dongqing Wudi looked at Mao Song with some emotion. In the eyes of all the directors and members of the parliament, Mao Song was just a nobody they had never paid too much attention to, or even almost never paid attention to. But it was this nobody who was about to completely affect the pattern of Zhongzhou State today. He was qualified to make demands. For the sake of your performance of surrendering, I can take this as your performance of meritorious service. Dongqing Wudi said slowly, of course, this is after we investigate according to the information you said and have a certain degree of confirmation. I can also guarantee that you will not be treated unfairly during your sentence in prison. Surrender? Service sentence? Mao Song's face suddenly changed and became extremely pale and desperate. Dongqing Wudi stood up and said slowly, in this incident, you may not be the mastermind, but you have also committed a felony. I will propose to send you to the desert prison. From now on, be a good man. The desert prison. The most mysterious and most heavily guarded prison in Zhongzhou State. For Mao Song, every prisoner in the desert prison could be said to be a big shot. It was a prison without a term. As long as everyone went in, it was basically impossible for them to come out again. But the desert prison, Mao Song's body gradually relaxed. A very happy smile came from the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, and finally spread to his whole face. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. He looked at Wu Qing, who was thinking or looking for something like a statue, and said excitedly again, thank you, Your Majesty. The desert prison was indeed the most horrible prison in Zhongzhou State. But he had just left the desert prison, and now that impasse could be regarded as his territory. He would enter the desert prison. Mao Song would die in prison. But for him and his family, it might be a brand new life. Dongqing Wudi, who just gave a vague hint, did not respond to the thanks behind him, and just opened the door of the reception room. 5 minutes later, Ma Si, who was taking notes, couldn't help but put down her pen and paper. She hurriedly rushed to the temporary meeting room of the Chen family. After passing the general news to Li Huaqing, she hurriedly rushed back to continue the unfinished interrogation and record. Mao Song became the focus of everyone's eyes. Yuan Lin was completely forgotten. An hour later, Dongqing Wudi's special bulletproof car slowly drove into the Chen family's compound. The door opened, and Lin Yin, codenamed Red Snow, was secretly escorted into Dongqing Wudi's interrogation room. The interrogation continued. Without warning, the storm had suddenly formed in the top building of Zhongzhou State. It's almost over. In the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, Xinyuan Wushang stood in front of his floor-to-ceiling window, looking in the direction of the Chen family's compound, and suddenly said. His eyes were full of flickering light blue electric currents, as if he had witnessed the whole process. Xing Tian's huge body sat steadily on the bed and thought for a moment after hearing the words. Before he could say anything, Xinyuan Wushang sighed with emotion again. The young madam of the Chen family is really amazing. That figure, that, Your Highness, Xing Tian reminded him, let me give you a friendly reminder. You have an engagement with the princess of the Dragon Clan, and that fiancé of yours has a higher authority than you. Although it's only a little, her path is completely different from yours. The smile on Xinyuan Wushang's face froze for a moment, and then gradually became distorted. He turned his head and looked at Xing Tian silently. After a long while, he smiled without a smile and said, Do you think she knows what jealousy is? Xing Tian was silent. After a long while, he said, You also have an engagement. Your appreciation of other women is easy to cause the princess's dissatisfaction. It has nothing to do with jealousy. The women of the human clan here are not suitable for you. Don't talk to me about women. Xinyuan Wushang said indifferently. There was a touch of despair in his eyes. What are women? Women are not suitable for me. I am a man. I am a real man. The corner of Xing Tian's mouth twitched. Xinyuan Wushang gritted his teeth. A real man should king a robot. Xing Tian coughed and wisely changed the topic. I don't think the parliament will cancel the alliance between Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun. This matter has nothing to do with anyone's will. The final result may be very lively, but this alliance should not disappear in a short time. Xinyuan Wushang turned around again and looked in the direction of the Qin family's courtyard. What's the reason? Checks and balances. Xing Tian said calmly, this alliance is now the only power in Zhongzhou State and even the whole dark world that can check and balance His Majesty. His Majesty sometimes does something out of line. No matter what the reason is, Jiang Shangyu's alliance will be kept. Of course, the parliament will inevitably make appropriate concessions. In fact, our goal has been achieved. The rise of the new group is unstoppable, and it is even stronger than expected. Checks and balances, stupid. Xinyuan Wushang shook his head. After this matter, let's wait until that ridiculous alliance survives. Xing Tian's words became more and more cautious. He said softly, judging from His Majesty's current combat capability, he can only guarantee that he won't be defeated at most in the face of Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun, and other things that we don't know about. The possibility of him winning is not high, and this is under the condition that he has the characteristics of level 8 authority. His Majesty now seems to only embody some abilities of level 7 authority of Heaven Ju. If he wants to fight with Jiang Shangyu's alliance now, the chance of winning is not big. You have never reached level 8 authority in martial arts before, have you? Xinyuan Wushang suddenly asked. Xing Tian was stunned and then said quietly, "My main authority has always been calligraphy." "So you don't understand?" Xinyuan Wushang said softly, "The level 8 authority of martial arts has to go through life and death. If Big Brother's breakthrough this time was not incredible, I would not dare to take too many risks. But his breakthrough this time is too exaggerated. He has just broken through, but he already has the characteristics of level 7 authority. Although his actual combat capability is far less than that of a real Heaven Ju if he is out of the real environment, the authority can't be copied. This also means that these thresholds are not obstacles for Big Brother at all. What he needs is experience and the authority in the future. Whether it is restarting or ending, these are always his authority." Xinyuan Wushang thought quietly and said softly, "Before there is a breakthrough in sister-in-law's dream, level 8 authority is Big Brother's limit, but it is also a crucial element. He must go through life and death to really understand something." Xing Tian was silent. He could roughly determine the current direction of Jiang Shangyu, and from the leaf that Mao Song took out, he could roughly understand Jiang Shangyu's surrounding environment. Now he might still be in Miracle City, but the place where he was already equivalent to the Chaos Camp or the Shadow Camp. In such an environment, Xinyuan Wushang and Xing Tian would expose themselves as soon as they took action. It was difficult for them to even get close to the forest, let alone follow Li Tianlan to that forest. When they were not sure what the state of the shadow creature behind Jiang Shangyu was, they did not dare to rashly describe it, otherwise, they might even hurt Li Tianlan. The parliament had already investigated the problem. With Li Tianlan's temper, since he knew the existence of Jiang Shangyu, it was impossible for him to pretend that this thing had not happened. His character was not destined to let him swallow this anger. And the reality would also make him try his best. Even Xing Tian knew that Li Huaqing and others would not give up the Jiang Shangyu alliance, the only chess piece that could balance Li Tianlan. How could Li Tianlan himself not know? However, in the face of the evidence given by Mao Song, it was really not so easy to make a decision to protect the Jiang Shangyu alliance. The parliament needed to discuss, play, and discuss. And before the official result appeared, it would also be when Li Tianlan could unscrupulously retaliate against the Jiang Shangyu alliance. Time was very limited. When the parliament made a decision, many things would not be easy to change. Li Tianlan either accepted the compensation and reached a new balance with the major groups in Zhongzhou state, or, no, there was no other choice. This was his only choice. Now all aspects need time. Xinyuan Wushang whispered, "It depends on who can seize the opportunity first." In the past decades, Li Shi's life finally ushered in a very rare period of peace. Her short-term life in Emperor Dong's palace was stable and leisurely. As the third deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, her injury was no longer a problem after being treated by Xinyuan Wushang, so she naturally became the strongest of the 3 deputy palace masters. However, unlike Situ Zhangyue and Saint, she had nothing to manage in Emperor Dong's palace. The position of deputy palace master seemed more like an idle position when there was nothing to do. Li Tianlan gave her a piece of land in front of a garden villa in Emperor Dong's palace. After Li Shi and Li Qingqing lived here, they rarely left. Li Shi stayed in the villa most of the time. The only request she made was to ask the elites of Emperor Dong's palace to buy some books. A cup of tea and a book in her hand seemed to be able to easily pass the day. Li Qingqing occasionally walked in Emperor Dong's palace, but most of the time she accompanied her mother or took care of the flowers and plants in front of the villa. There were no maids, gardeners, or cooks in the villa. Occasionally, there were logistics personnel who delivered meals to the mother and daughter. But more often, the mother and daughter went out to buy some simple vegetables and cooked by themselves. They lived in Emperor Dong's palace in this way. They did not integrate into Emperor Dong's palace, but they did not tidy up either. It seemed that they lived in peace and isolation. Qingqing, is this kind of life what you want? In the gradually darkening night, the exquisitely decorated villa turned on the lights. After dinner, the mother and daughter were washing the dishes in the kitchen. Feeling the cool and clear water droplets falling on their hands, Li Shi suddenly turned to look at her daughter and asked. Li Qingqing looked at Li Shi with some doubts, and then lowered her head to wash the dishes. She stood straight, lowered her head, and blinked her eyelashes, looking focused and docile. It's actually very good. It's very quiet and relaxed. No one forces me to attend classes and receive training, no one urges me to practice martial arts, and no one teaches me some talents that I don't like. A very happy smile appeared on Li Qingqing's beautiful face. I haven't meditated for several days. I suddenly feel very safe here. It seems that the past is in the past. Yes, it's all in the past. Li Shi was silent for a while, and then murmured to herself as if she was sleep-talking. She looked at her daughter, who was smiling, and whispered, "But your life is not normal in the eyes of your peers. Maybe you should go shopping, buy some new clothes, and even wait for Tiannan University to be established. You can go to school, make a boyfriend, get married, and start a family, instead of staying at home by yourself every day like me. If this goes on, the whole person will become more and more isolated." "It's not me." Li Qingqing chuckled. "I still have you, and you also have me. Mom, do you know what I've been thinking these days? This is this villa, just like our small world. We can live as we want. We can go out to buy the food we like, read the books we like, and be in a daze. We don't have to worry about etiquette. When we laugh, we don't have to worry about how many teeth we show. We don't need to worry about whether our sitting posture is correct or not, and we don't need to worry about whether our movements are elegant. All the constraints are gone, and we are very free. And you are still by my side. This is very good. This is enough. I like it here." As she spoke, Li Qingqing suddenly frowned and continued, "It would be better if that nasty guy didn't come to harass us. Mom, I'll talk to my brother-in-law. He will intervene in this matter, right?" Li Shi seemed to think of something interesting. She chuckled and said, "He won't. Even if he will, I won't agree. In your eyes, he may be a nuisance, but I welcome him to be a guest here. Well, how about you invite him to have lunch at home tomorrow?" "I won't go." Li Qingqing frowned and protested softly. There was a sudden knock on the door, interrupting him. Li Qingqing hesitated and stood still for a while. "The nasty guy is here. Why don't you open the door?" Li Shi's smile was soft and gentle. Li Qingqing gently bit her lower lip, walked slowly to the door, and opened the door. Outside the door stood an object covered with all kinds of snacks and gift boxes. His slender figure was almost completely covered by all kinds of snacks and gift boxes, and even his face could not be seen. Many things were controlled by him with sword intent, suspended in the air. Only a pair of eyes leaked out from the gap of the gift box, bright and gentle. "Qingqing, I bought you some snacks. These are all the snacks you ate a few days ago and thought they tasted good. I noticed that you ate more of these snacks. You should like them very much, right? Oh, there are some new kinds. You can try them. If you like them, I will buy them again. I heard from Auntie that you like sweets, so I asked the kitchen to make some. You can see if you like them. If you want to eat something, tell me, and I will ask someone to arrange it immediately. And this is for you." The object, who was almost covered with snacks, said and moved. He dragged out a huge pure white plush bear toy from behind with some difficulty. Li Qingqing looked at this scene in a daze. Her eyes were a little happy, a little angry, and a little helpless. The object covered with snacks walked in cautiously. She came over after cleaning up the kitchen. When she saw this scene, she was stunned subconsciously. Countless snacks were walking forward cautiously. Shi's mouth was slightly raised, and her eyes became more and more intoxicated. It was not difficult for her to imagine that the object was covered with snacks and ran over excitedly in the eyes of many people. Looking at Li Qingqing, who was at a loss, Shi winked and turned around to make tea with a smile. "You are so stupid. Why do you have so many? Do you think Mom and I are pigs? If you can't finish them, why don't you take them a few more times? They are hung everywhere. It's so ugly." Li Qingqing hurriedly picked up the snacks on his body, but her eyes were a little bright. She had never had such an experience before. The other party stood there motionlessly, giving Li Qingqing the feeling that he was a tree full of snacks. She could pick whatever she wanted to eat from outside. Now that she was picking up a pile of snacks, she felt a sense of joy as if she had harvested a harvest. Sure enough, after the snacks covered the guy's body and face, he became much more pleasing to the eye. The gifts were carefully taken down by Li Qingqing little by little. Lin Youxian's handsome face and gentle smile appeared in front of Li Shi. Li Qingqing's face turned red for no reason, and then she became a little angry. She repeated again, "Stupid. It's okay to be stupid. It's better to take more at one time than to run back and forth." Lin Youxian looked at Li Qingqing with a smile. "Don't come if you think it's troublesome. Mom and I are willing to be quiet." Li Shi snorted softly. She resisted verbally, but she seemed to be used to taking a pair of men's slippers from the shoe cabinet. It seemed that, probably, she was really used to it, a little bit. Li Qingqing looked at the slippers she threw on the ground and was a little dazed. The mother and daughter had not been in Emperor Dong's palace for a long time, but the guy in front of them appeared too frequently. In the first 2 days, it was better. Later, as their injuries recovered, as long as Lin Youxian was still in Emperor Dong's palace, he almost came here as soon as he had time. He came here as soon as he had time. He had nothing to do at all. In the beginning, when he couldn't get the treatment of entering the house, he stood outside the door and talked. Or when Li Qingqing happened to be outside, he would look at the flowers and plants with her. Or he would bring some snacks, desserts, handmade toys, or ask her out for dinner and a movie. Sometimes he even came here without thinking about what to do. At the most frequent time, Lin Youxian came here 16 times a day. Li Shi looked at him with a smile. Li Qingqing, who had never experienced this situation, almost collapsed. As he came here day by day, Li Qingqing finally allowed him to enter the house for a cup of tea. The next day, when she went shopping with her mother in the supermarket, her mother took a pair of men's slippers. She was confused, but Li Qingqing did not object. Then this pair of shoes became exclusive to Lin Youxian. "I don't think it's troublesome. I mean, I can save the time of running back and see you more." Lin Youxian's voice was as gentle as the wind. He picked up the big white bear sitting on his leg and handed it to Li Qingqing. He smiled and said, "It's for you. Don't talk nonsense." Li Qingqing glared at Lin Youxian and wanted to refuse the gift. But for her, who had almost no childhood since she was a child, the big white bear in front of her was so cute. She hesitated, took it, and said thank you in a low voice. Lin Youxian did not speak, but looked at her softly. There seemed to be thousands of words in his eyes. The girl who had been stabbed by him in Huading. This girl was always in his mind but could only be suppressed in the bottom of his heart. Lin Youxian had to admit that when he knew that she would live in Emperor Dong's palace in the future, in addition to astonishment, there was only endless ecstasy in his heart. This was the goddess and angel that he was willing to protect for a lifetime. The goddess and angel that could only belong to him. "Do you want to go to the movies?" Lin Youxian said softly. "Recently, a new cartoon has been released. It's very good. Do you want to go together?" Li Qingqing hesitated and shook her head. "No, I'll accompany my mother." He looked at Lin Youxian, whose eyes were deep and gentle without disappointment, and whispered, "Come and have a cup of tea." Lin Youxian's smile became extremely bright in an instant. The two turned around the porch. On the sofa in the living room, Li Shi had begun to make tea. Auntie. Lin Yuxian greeted her respectfully. Come and sit down. Li Shi smiled gently. Wait a while. I'm not in a hurry. Lin Yuxian smiled a little honestly. There's one thing good about me. I don't like to be regarded as an outsider. Auntie, you don't have to be so troublesome. It's not troublesome. Li Shi just opened her mouth with a chuckle, and a phone suddenly rang. Li Shi was stunned. She seemed to be a little surprised that someone would call her. He had a mobile phone, which he got after coming to Emperor Dong's palace. There were very few contacts in the address book. In addition to Li Qingqing, there were only a few high-level people in Emperor Dong's palace. On weekdays, the mobile phone basically would not ring here. She took the mobile phone from under the coffee table with some doubts and glanced at the number. Li Shi's movements were slightly stiff, and she was silent for a few seconds. I'll answer the phone. She looked up and smiled with no abnormal expression. Qingqing, you have a good chat. You have a good chat. Lin Yuxian got up with a smile and watched Li Shi walk upstairs. Her figure stepped on the corner of the second floor, and she finally pressed the answer button. Sorry, Ms. Li Shi. I hope I didn't disturb your rest at this time. A cold and pleasant voice sounded on the other end of the phone. Li Shi was silent for a moment and whispered, I just had dinner. Boss Qin, what's the matter? Qin Weibai on the other end of the phone smiled gently. It's about Kunlun City. Li Shi was silent. Her life had been very peaceful, but it did not mean that she had forgotten Kunlun City, the place that brought her countless pain and despair. There are new variables in the case of Qin Fangqing and Qin Shi. Of course, this is a better variable for us. In such a situation, I think there is no need for Kunlun City to exist. There was no need for Kunlun City to exist. Kunlun City? Li Shi's eyes suddenly widened, and she said subconsciously, What did you say? I need your help. Qin Weibai said with a smile. Li Shi was silent, and the special warfare city in the ice and snow subconsciously appeared in her mind. For Kunlun City, the Gu family, and Gu Xingyun, Li Shi couldn't tell what kind of mentality she had. It was a kind of mentality that she couldn't tell or understand after countless emotions merged together. But one thing was certain. If Kunlun City could really disappear, Li Shi was willing to provide all the help she could without hesitation. Li Shi's eyes became extremely determined in an instant. What do you need me to do? You don't need to do anything. Qin Weibai whispered, It's enough to testify. Mao Song has confessed the existence of Phoenix Pavilion. Zhongzhou State will soon launch an investigation, but it will be very fast. No one knows how long it will take. Maybe it will be now, maybe it will be tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. No one can be sure whether Kunlun City can get the news. In such a situation, a lot of evidence may be destroyed every minute. Mao Song has now provided clues, and I'm about to have a strong witness here. She has enough information to prove the existence of Kunlun City. Then, it's up to you to testify again and supplement other information of Phoenix Pavilion. Li Shi listened silently. When Qin Weibai finished, she took a deep breath and whispered, Okay. Her voice gradually began to become as hard as iron. I will explain to the Parliament in detail the reasons for the treason case more than 20 years ago, and everything I did around Li Guangtu as the pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion at that time. No need. Qin Weibai seemed to be stunned for a moment, and then she said softly but sincerely, Some things can be mentioned, but some things can be left unsaid. Madam, you should pay attention to protect yourself. If Li Shi told all the things she had done in the past, she might get herself involved. The treason case of the Li family had a wide influence, and some of its dark clouds were still unclear. But with the rise of Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace, all this was irrelevant. I understand. Li Shi said quietly, Should I go now? Qin Weibai said, The plane has been arranged. You will get off in Nanyun, and then take a special plane to Yuzhou. When you pass by Nanyun, I hope you can bring another witness. You should be familiar with Liu Dongyue of Nanyun Special Operations Bureau. He is now under the control of the Blood Battalion. It won't take too long. Okay. Li Shi nodded. Thinking about Qin Weibai's words, she suddenly asked, Is the Parliament still discussing this matter? Qin Weibai smiled. The parliament will be very busy today. There are too many things they need to discuss. In a short time, it is estimated that it will be difficult to have a clear result. Li Shi's eyes flickered. She said, then she hung up the phone and went downstairs. At the same time, at Yuzhou International Airport, Qin Weibai put down her mobile phone and silently thought about what was missing in the plan. Mao Song mentioned the name of Phoenix Pavilion for the first time, and then reported it with the substantial evidence of Phoenix Pavilion. Then Li Shi made the last stab. After this sudden and fierce storm, the new group would turn the tables, and the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group were destined to be riddled with holes. This was the best result that could be fought for at present. Unfortunately, they still can't be completely destroyed. Qin Weibai said to herself with some regret. In my opinion, this is not a bad thing. Horsewoman on the side handed Qin Weibai a glass of warm water and said softly. Qin Weibai glanced at her. Horsewoman said with a smile, His Majesty's footsteps are unstoppable. In the dark world, he is already invincible. As long as he is given time, Kunlun City, Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, Wang Xingxiao, and even Wang Tianzong will not be his opponents. It is not difficult to completely destroy them. It is just a matter of time. In the current situation, after the storm, Kunlun City will no longer exist, and the Gu family will linger on because of Jiang Shangyu's alliance. This can also give Gu Xingyun some false hope, so that he will not have a life-and-death struggle. This time, we will provide tangible evidence of the existence of Phoenix Pavilion. But this is only a part of it. We can use this part as a deterrent to draw most of the hidden chess pieces of Phoenix Pavilion to our side. In this way, the new group will hide a very strong force in the dark. In general, this effect is much better than completely destroying Gu Xingyun and others. Qin Weibai lowered her head slightly, and her white and slender fingers rubbed the cup unconsciously. I understand what you mean. Her voice was erratic, and she was almost murmuring to herself, but she shook her head and did not continue to speak. In her mind, she always thought of the siege that she did not know was in the past or in the future. She thought of the sharp sword piercing through Li Tianlan's chest. Such images flashed in her mind again and again. If Gu Xingyun, Li Kuangtu, and others did not die, she would always feel a little uneasy. Qin Weibai shook her head hard and looked out of the window. In the bustling exit of the airport, a girl, who looked 11 or 12 years old or 13 or 14 years old, as beautiful as an elf and an angel, walked out alone, pulling a delicate small suitcase under everyone's gaze. Her small figure walked in the crowd without the slightest loneliness or fear. Instead, there was a kind of indescribable spirit in her. Qin Weibai smiled, opened the door, got out, and waved to the girl. The girl's eyes lit up. She trotted over quickly, handed the suitcase to Horsewoman, and then reached out to hug Qin Weibai's waist. Sister, Qin Weibai said yes, lowered her head, and touched the girl's head. She whispered, Is everything ready? The girl nodded gently, and subconsciously glanced at the delicate suitcase in Horsewoman's hand. The suitcase was very light. Because there was only some simple information in it, and there was not even a change of clothes. Those seemingly simple information were all sharp swords against Kunlun City, which were the sharpness that had been hidden for many years. Qin Weibai unconsciously stroked Gu Xianyan's hair, but her eyes quietly looked in the direction of the Qin family's courtyard. The sword light suddenly rose. The storm fell. Chapter 1123. When Ma Si entered the temporary conference room in the backyard of the Chen family for the fourth time, the atmosphere in the conference room was almost frozen. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the middle of the night. The ventilation system in the living room had been turned on to the maximum, but the thick and dazzling smoke was drifting in every corner of the hall. Looking through the light, Ma Si couldn't see clearly who was sitting in the conference room for a while. Is there any new information? Li Huaqing's suppressed voice sounded in the deep and dignified voice. Yes. Ma Si nodded subconsciously and looked in the direction of the voice. Only then did she find that Li Huaqing was no longer in the position where he came in last time, but sitting on the sofa on the other side. His whole body was wrapped in the soft leather sofa, and he was raising his hand to rub his forehead. He looked tired and haggard in the fuzzy smoke. Ma Si looked down at the folder in her hand and was at a loss for a moment. The interrogation of Mao Song was still going on. It was a protracted war that no one knew how long it would last. And he came here again and again to bring the latest information, or in other words, Mao Song's latest confession, to the giants in the conference room. This was the fourth time he had given his testimony. The speed of updating the confession was very slow. The conference room was in a stalemate, and the interrogation room was also in a game. Although Mao Song was very cooperative, the interrogation process was not very smooth. In order to show fairness and truth, Dongqing Wudi, who had communicated with Mao Song alone before, withdrew from the position of chief interrogator. Yi Dongxing and Yang Jianghu were in charge of interrogating Mao Song. The fierce battle between the Prince Group and the Southeast Group broke out in the interrogation room almost without concealment. For every question, the two had almost different opinions. Yang Jianghu almost tried his best to induce Mao Song's confession from different directions, including subtle threats and temptations, naked warnings, questioning and confirming from various angles. Ma Si experienced the whole process and also recorded Mao Song's confession. Every confession had to be signed by all the directors and members of parliament in the interrogation room before it was sent to the conference room. The first interrogation of Mao Song and the recording of the confession lasted less than half an hour. The content of the recording was less than 1,500 words. But it was for these 1,500 words that the directors and members of parliament in the interrogation room argued for nearly 2 hours. Each word of the confession was so sensitive that it needed to be discussed and disputed. When the first confession was sent to the conference room, the storm across Yuzhou province had already taken shape. Phoenix Pavilion, the secret organization in Kunlun City. When all the big shots present heard about the role of the Phoenix Pavilion, almost all of them were stunned. It was not uncommon for them to use women as weapons in the trials and tribulations they had experienced. But when Kunlun City gathered these weapons together and specifically targeted the core of Zhongzhou State and the future core, it had two completely different meanings. To put it bluntly, the former was nothing more than profit. The latter, who had formed an organization, had undoubtedly revealed their wild ambitions. It took even longer for Mao Song's second statement to be delivered to the conference room. It was already 7 o'clock in the evening. The second confession recorded in great detail about the operation situation of the Phoenix Pavilion in Kunlun City. The major departments coordinated with each other and cooperated seamlessly. Following that, a fierce argument broke out in the conference room. When the third statement was delivered, this dispute was pushed to the climax. It was not just the conference room. Even the interrogation room was in a state of mutual hostility. Because in Mao Song's third confession, he mentions some lists that the Phoenix Pavilion had been constantly infiltrating over the years. With Mao Song's position, it was naturally impossible for him to come into contact with those who were too important. There were only a few rising stars who had enough potential to rise. However, this list, coupled with Mao Song's vague statement that there were counselor-level figures who were involved in the Phoenix Pavilion's pink trap, every word of his confession was extremely shocking. The fiercest dispute or even quarrel in the interrogation room came from this. A counselor giant became the prey of the Phoenix Pavilion. Regarding this, Mao Song did not produce substantial evidence. He just affirmed this point, but could not determine which counselor it was. When Ma Si recorded Mao Song's testimony, Yang Jianghu was the first to express a clear objection. He bluntly said that Mao Song's testimony was ridiculous and not credible. Yi Dongxing insisted on seeking truth from facts. He recorded this point and conveyed it to the conference room. His point of view was also very simple. Perhaps Mao Song's testimony was not credible, but this was not a reason not to record it. The truth of the matter needed to be investigated and distinguished by the big shots in the conference room. To hide some clues that could cause serious consequences here was, to a certain extent, irresponsible. The two counselors argued in the interrogation room for nearly half an hour, and neither of them could convince the other. In the end, Dongqing Wudi personally made the decision, took notes as usual, and conveyed the complete version of the confession to the conference room. The moment Dongqing Wudi made the decision, Ma Si noticed that Yang Jianghu's face suddenly became extremely cold, and there was even a touch of cruel cold light in his eyes. Now, Ma Si knocked on the door of the conference room again, holding the fourth confession in his hand. The fourth confession was the final interrogation of Mao Song, as well as another interrogation of Lin Yin. The combination of the two confessions proved the authenticity of what Mao Song said. In Lin Yin's confession, the other party provided a school affiliated with Phoenix Pavilion, located in the suburbs of Huading, and the things recorded in it were even more absurd and amazing. Mao Song walked to Li Huaqing with heavy steps and handed the information in his hand to Li Huaqing. His eyes were a little unfocused. As Li Huaqing's secretary, he knew very well that the 4 consecutive confessions were not what Li Huaqing wanted to see. If Yang Jianghu was the only one in the interrogation room, it would be impossible to have such a long argument. Several counselors from the standpoint of the academy also quietly supported Yang Jianghu's point of view. The Southeast Group and the Giant Group, however, tacitly formed some cooperation again in the interrogation. This was probably Wen Siyuan. The Southeast Group, which had gone all out to suppress the new group a few days ago, seemed to see the opportunity to let Wen Siyuan enter the cabinet again. This year, Zhongzhou State was really full of ups and downs. Send it out. Li Huaqing waved his hand, pulled out a piece of paper from the materials, and waved his hand wearily. The interrogation room had already made several copies of the confessions according to the number of people in the conference room, ensuring that everyone here had a copy. Ma Si walked around the conference room and handed out the information to every big shot. When he sent them to Li Tianlan, he paid special attention to Li Tianlan's expression. Li Tianlan took the materials with no expression on his face and looked at them quietly, without any attitude. The conference room became quieter and quieter, leaving only the sound of the counselors shaking the materials in their hands. Gradually, the shaking sound of the materials stopped. The conference room became completely silent, like a graveyard. Everyone, talk about your opinions. In the extreme silence, Li Huaqing slowly opened his mouth. His voice was still steady and dignified. But at this moment, when his voice fell into the ears of others, they always felt that Li Huaqing's voice seemed to be missing something. Chapter 1124. No one took the lead to express their attitude. In the unspeakable silence of the conference room, everyone's eyes met each other, and they could almost see the complexity and weirdness in each other's eyes. If the information in his hands was realistic, then it had to be said that it was a bold and imaginative piece of information. This was the 4th confession sent by Ma Si. In the confession, there was little description of Mao Song. Instead, it was a large piece of information about Lin Yin's relationship with Phoenix Pavilion and the schools affiliated with Phoenix Pavilion. Lin Yin graduated from an art school called Ethereal in Huading 6 years ago. There were very few people in Huading who had heard of this art school. The specific address of the school was located in a closed office building in the suburbs, which was not listed or rented. It was extremely private. The lower 5 floors of the office building were all disguised as Kunlun City properties, and the 5th to the 12th floor was the threshold of the Ethereal Art School. Lin Yin introduced the threshold of the Ethereal Art School in great detail. First of all, they had to at least graduate from a key university in Zhongzhou State. There was no upper limit. Those who had excellent performance in school could enter the preparatory class in advance after passing various assessments. Second was age. The age of the preparatory class was 19 to 23 years old. The age of the official students was 23 to 29 years old. They had to have strong professionalism and a certain degree of work experience. They had to be more than 1.65 meters tall, have strict body measurements, be able to use at least one foreign language for unobstructed communication, have a standard of Mandarin, have a delicate appearance, good temperament, relatively simple love life, virgins preferred, rich hobbies and proficient specialties, a lot of things. There were more than 20 prerequisites for admission alone. And it was worth noting that these were only the admission conditions. In other words, people who met these conditions could submit an application for admission, but they might not be approved. Even Li Tianlan sighed with emotion when he saw these so-called conditions. Kunlun City was playing big and fancy. According to these conditions, such a person would probably be able to enter a good company easily and have a good position. This was indeed a reserved service for the lovers of many big shots. It was really an eye-opening experience. From another perspective, any official student in the Ethereal Academy of Arts would definitely be a so-called goddess who had a long line of suitors. But in the Ethereal Academy of Arts, they were just trading items waiting to be evaluated. Lin Yin also listed the courses of the Ethereal Art School. This was the most eye-opening part of it all. Painting, yoga, gymnastics, vocal music. This sounded like a perfectly normal lesson. When Li Tianlan first saw these names, he felt a little strange. These courses were indeed worth training, but the key was that those who could meet the admission standards of Ethereal Art Academy couldn't be unfamiliar with these courses. So what was the point of learning them again after entering the academy? Become more professional? But when he looked at it in detail, he finally understood what the so-called painting meant. In a 45-minute painting class, the students did not use their hands or feet. Lick bananas, lick glass, lick lollipops. Ethereal Art Academy was constantly developing the students' specialties in the most subtle areas. Of course, the vocal music class wasn't about singing. Instead, it was about training the students' tone of speech over and over again. It was about what kind of emphasis to use in certain situations, and how to make their voices more melodious at certain times. Being knowledgeable was a real thing. However, being knowledgeable didn't mean that everything could be easily accepted. At the very least, the big shots in the conference room were shaken by this curriculum. What was even more difficult for them to accept was the number of people in Ethereal Art Academy. According to Lin Yin, Ethereal Art Academy enrolled students in several provinces, such as Huading, Jiangzhou, Wuyue, Zhongyuan, Minnan, Jianghuai, and Beihu. In advance, the executive board of Phoenix Pavilion secretly screened the targets and sent invitations. Each student who successfully entered the academy had a recommendation. If the student recommended by the student agreed to join the academy and passed the application, the recommender would receive a subsidy or other substantial reward and get another recommendation. If the student recommended by the recommender agreed to join the academy but his application didn't pass, the recommender would be disqualified for 1 year. When all sorts of benefits, personal obligations, and certain rights were combined, everyone realized that there was actually an extremely complete set of rules prevailing in Ethereal Art Academy. The students were clearly divided from the moment they entered the academy to the moment they graduated. It was huge, but not chaotic. Yes, it was huge. Excellent women, who were rare in the hearts of many ordinary people, were constantly piling up in this art school. According to Lin Yin's memory, there were nearly 700 people in Ethereal Art Academy in her year alone. How many years was that? The previous 700 people. What did that mean? And Ethereal Art Academy wasn't just a complete Phoenix Pavilion. At the very least, Phoenix Pavilion had at least 2 other similar schools. If they were all of the same size, it meant that there were at least 2,000 such students. Of course, the so-called students didn't mean that they were official members of Phoenix Pavilion. Historically, those who could officially join Phoenix Pavilion were truly outstanding students or special students. In this regard, Phoenix Pavilion never forced them. Students could refuse Phoenix Pavilion's arrangements and find so-called financial backers on their own. In return, they would provide certain resources to the academy according to the agreement. If they were abandoned, they could submit a new application to the academy. If the application was passed, they would continue to complete their studies. In Lin Yin's testimony, almost no one had ever refused the academy's arrangements. Most people would not enter the Phoenix Pavilion, but the academy would handle it appropriately. They would arrange for students to be with one rich person after another. This involved all sorts of industries. These people were officially eliminated from the Phoenix Pavilion, but to a certain extent, they could still be said to be of the highest quality. Some of them were secretly kept as mistresses, and some even got married successfully. After being packaged by the academy, they basically lived a life of luxury as long as they left the campus. The giants in the conference room attached great importance to the real Phoenix Pavilion, but they also kept a high degree of attention to these people who didn't join Phoenix Pavilion. In the dead silence, Zhou Mulin gently knocked on the table. The subtle sound became extremely harsh in the conference room. His voice was a little low, and he said slowly, "This is no longer a problem of Kunlun City. To put it more broadly, this is an extremely serious problem of intelligence. I propose that we thoroughly investigate all the problems of Kunlun City. At the same time, we immediately send people to block Ethereal Art Academy in Huading and revoke Gu Xingyun's position as the guardian of Zhongzhou State. In addition, we should strictly examine the financial problems of Kunlun City and suspend all high-level officials of Kunlun City." Everyone was shocked. Guo Wenyan opened his mouth and seemed to want to say something. Zhou Mulin took a meaningful look at everyone present and said softly, "Everyone, no matter from the perspective of the complex internal problems of Kunlun City or Gu Xingyun's personal problems, he is not qualified to be the guardian of Zhongzhou State. We didn't have a choice before, but now, I think we already have a more suitable candidate than Gu Xingyun. He is younger than Gu Xingyun, and no one can doubt his combat capability. His position is also far firmer than Gu Xingyun's. In the long time to come, I think it's the most responsible thing for him to do." Chapter 11:25. Zhou Mulin did not mention Li Tianlan's name, but everyone in the conference room knew who he was talking about. In today's dark world, there were only a few people who could crush Gu Xingyun in terms of combat capability. The few was not the only one, but on such an occasion, it could only be Li Tianlan. What was Li Tianlan's image in the dark world now? In terms of personal combat capability, he had more than crushed Gu Xingyun. He killed Gu Qianchuan with a shocking sword in the desert, tore the Snow Country army with a sword outside Sai City, killed an invincible realm killer with a punch outside Huading Airport, and defeated Jiang Shangyu in Shenyuan City. Now that the final battle in Beihai was over, everyone had clearly felt that the era of Dong Huang had officially come. Crush Gu Xingyun? In the eyes of most people, it might be a great achievement, but such an achievement did not deserve Li Tianlan. Now, Li Tianlan's image in the whole dark world was clear and distinct. In terms of personal combat capability, Li Tianlan completely crushed the whole dark world. This kind of strength might not be very obvious because Li Tianlan had not risen for a long time, but in essence, he was even stronger than Wang Tianzong before the breakthrough. Unparalleled in the world, invincible. Such a word seemed to be able to be applied to Li Tianlan. If such a person became the guardian of Zhongzhou State, judging from Li Tianlan's age, he could protect Zhongzhou State for at least half a century. The parliament of Zhongzhou State did not deny Li Tianlan's combat capability. This was something undeniable. But the giants were particularly worried about Li Tianlan's position. This did not mean that they denied Li Tianlan's loyalty to Zhongzhou State, but compared with Emperor Dong's palace, many people were worried that Li Tianlan might have some tendencies in his mind. This tendency might not be too obvious most of the time, but as the guardian of Zhongzhou State and the war god of the nation, no matter how inconspicuous the tendency was, once it was shown, it was enough to cause a huge storm. Therefore, even if Li Tianlan went to Kunlun City and seriously injured Gu Xingyun, proving that Gu Xingyun was not qualified, the parliament of Zhongzhou State still kept subtle silence. In fact, what Zhongzhou State worried about was not only Li Tianlan's position, but also his character. Compared with Gu Xingyun, who was good at compromise and forbearance and was more like a businessman than a guardian to some extent, Li Tianlan's character was too unyielding and fierce. The Tang family in Yuzhou and the Qi family of the Special Warfare Group were the clearest examples. A young man who could say that he was the overall situation of Zhongzhou State was totally different from Gu Xingyun in terms of character. Not to mention the problem of being too rigid and easy to break, it was very difficult for a person who was too fierce to obtain the majority of people's approval. This kind of standardly style has been used in the continent had spread for hundreds of years, but the past was in the past. The current leaders were used to Gu Xingyun's style. Now that the style of the Li family had returned, everyone would feel a little uncomfortable. This kind of discomfort was not only for the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group, but also for the academics, the North Group, and even the Giant Group. Such discomfort would naturally turn into hesitation and worry at certain times. They all recognized Li Tianlan's combat strength. As the most powerful overlord country in the world, Zhongzhou State should have such a guardian. The guardian of Zhongzhou State should also have such a style. Everyone knew this, but everyone was still worried that Li Tianlan's sharpness would not only deter the opponent but also hurt themselves. Therefore, Li Huaqing made a proposal that everyone could accept when the new group and the Giant Group were under unprecedented pressure. Li Tianlan officially entered the parliament and jointly controlled the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State with Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun was still the state-protecting war god. And Li Tianlan served as the chief security advisor of Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun was indeed no match for Li Tianlan. But Kunlun City had been developing in Zhongzhou State for so many years, and its foundation had long been deeply rooted. As long as the storm within the Special Warfare Group was quelled, and when Gu Xingyun stabilized his position, it was completely possible to check and balance Li Tianlan in a short time. And out of respect for Li Tianlan, the parliament could also give Li Tianlan a certain leading position, and even the official ranking could put Li Tianlan ahead of Gu Xingyun. All this was temporary. After all, Gu Xingyun could not always stand in front of Li Tianlan. But the parliament also happened to need time. The members and directors of this and the next session needed a certain amount of time to get familiar with Li Tianlan's style. And as time went by, Li Tianlan would gradually mature and feel more and more clearly the constraints brought by Gu Xingyun. As he grew older, his mentality would also mature. At that time, Li Tianlan might be more pragmatic and understand the truth of leaving silence to his own people and showing his sharpness to outsiders. This was a mature and wise proposal. After several tests and compromises, a new balance would soon be formed. There was even a clear outcome to this matter. But the appearance of the Qin family's scandal disrupted all this in an instant. Everyone had accepted the reality, but accepting the reality did not mean that they would not be shocked. The giants in the conference room might not have completely reacted until now. How could a scandal of the Qin family become a storm? After sweeping through the Prince Group, it completely involved the Special Warfare Group, Jiang Shangyu, and even the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. And what changed all this was, it turned out to be just a secretary. It was not even Qin Fangqing's secretary. It was Qin Shi's secretary. Phoenix Pavilion. The scandal of the Qin family involved the Phoenix Pavilion and seemed to have completely become a scandal of Zhongzhou State. If these things were true, then Gu Xingyun, the guardian of Zhongzhou State, was no longer a question of unqualified. Everyone was recalling the few confessions they had seen. If they were to connect these confessions together, they could indeed form a complete and logical reality. They could form a hidden Phoenix Pavilion that was out of everyone's sight. In other words, the things in the confessions were very likely to be true. When there was great certainty that Gu Xingyun was unqualified, Zhou Mulin suddenly proposed the more suitable Li Tianlan. He temporarily put aside all the scandals of the Phoenix Pavilion and the Qin family. This was tantamount to forcing everyone, including Li Huaqing, into a corner where they had to express their views. I agree with Director Zhou. Compared with Gu Xingyun, His Majesty Li Tianlan is more suitable to be the guardian of Zhongzhou State and more likely to bring a sense of security to Zhongzhou State. Everyone, we all know the history of the Li family. Now the return of the Li family is crucial for Zhongzhou State. Zhou Yunhai spoke without hesitation. He was more straightforward and directly mentioned Li Tianlan's name. Li Tianlan sat quietly in the corner and said nothing. I also agree with the two directors. In fact, because of Gu Xingyun's character, Zhongzhou State's right to speak in the dark world has declined in recent years, and there are constant problems inside the special warfare system. At this time, we need a strong enough figure who can control the scene to replace Gu Xingyun. His Majesty Li Tianlan is the most suitable choice, and it can even be said that he is the only choice. Ji Wenzhang, the director of the Southeast Group, said with a poker face. Li Huaqing frowned quickly and glanced at Guo Wenyan, who was frowning beside him. First, Zhou Mulin, then Zhou Yunhai, and then Ji Wenzhang. Dongqing Wudi, Hua Jingyang, and Wan Qingyun were all in the interrogation room. Chen Fangqing was dead. That was to say, 3 of the 5 directors in the conference room had made their positions clear. Zhou Mulin seemed to be just a casual proposal, but at this time, it inexplicably became a vote. Li Huaqing's eyes wandered and he glanced at Li Tianlan calmly. Li Tianlan was quietly leaning on the sofa in the corner, motionless. Li Huaqing frowned slightly. Vaguely, he could feel that Li Tianlan was not pretending now. It seemed that something else really attracted his attention. At this moment, at this crucial moment for him, all his thoughts were not in the conference room at all. What was he thinking? Chapter 11:26. Li Huaqing stared at Li Tianlan for a few seconds, then turned his eyes calmly and said in a low voice, "I agree in principle, but we can't be too hasty in this matter. In the current situation, stability is the first priority. Now that we have a clue, we still need to investigate what should be investigated. Immediately organize people to control the people involved in the confessions and the art school and investigate them in detail. When there are results, we will talk about the details." There was a moment of silence in the conference room. Zhou Mulin, Ji Wenzhang, and Zhou Yunhai did not speak. After all, Li Huaqing was the president. This position had unquestionable authority. This time, Li Huaqing said these words directly without asking their opinions. There was no doubt that this was equivalent to his decision. It was not impossible for the president's decision to be overturned before it became a formal resolution. But once it was done, regardless of whether it would succeed or not, it first meant that a fierce game and storm would be set off at the top of the parliament. The most obvious aspect of such a game was the voting. It was not a vote inspired by the president. This word also meant that the parliament had become a battlefield for voting. As the most powerful country in the world, Zhongzhou State was involved in almost unimaginable aspects from the inside to the outside, from the top to the bottom. And the countless decisions of the parliament were not a battlefield that could be decided by the directors and members of parliament casually. Wisdom was never equal to war, but the art of balance and compromise. Li Huaqing decided to put this matter aside and carry out the investigation first. When he didn't want a full-scale war, the major groups would put it aside. No one wanted to push Li Huaqing too hard. The game was not a fight without considering the consequences. Just as Li Huaqing did not dare to push Li Tianlan before, Li Tianlan did not dare to push Li Huaqing now. Their demands might have irreconcilable conflicts in some aspects, but in the same way, if they wanted to achieve their own goals, they could not do without each other's support. Li Huaqing picked up the teacup and took a sip. He looked at the silent directors and then at Li Tianlan. Suddenly, he asked with a smile, "Tianlan, what do you think?" "Investigate." Li Tianlan was silent for a full 5 minutes before he said in a drifting tone. His tone was extremely slow, with indescribable stiffness and dullness. It sounded very unconscious, like sleep-talking. At this moment, everyone in the conference room did the same action. They straightened up, turned their heads, and looked in Li Tianlan's direction. Li Tianlan was still sitting there, motionless. His breathing was extremely steady, but somehow, at this moment, he gave everyone a very confused feeling. What was going on? Everyone was dumbfounded. Especially Guo Wentian. From afternoon to evening, it was Guo Wentian who quarreled with Li Tianlan the most fiercely. He constantly questioned the authenticity of several testimonies, constantly changed concepts, and interfered with other people's thoughts. His attitude of protecting Gu Xingyun was extremely obvious. The appearance of the Phoenix Pavilion also impacted his worldview. Guo Wentian didn't have a good impression of Kunlun City now, but he must protect the giant group if possible. If the existence of the Phoenix Pavilion was confirmed, not to mention how big an earthquake it would cause in Zhongzhou State, at least the fact that Lin Yin had seduced Mao Song would become a complete fact. Li Tianlan could completely involve this matter in Chen Fangqing's death. While suppressing the Prince Group, he would completely destroy the Special Warfare Group. At that time, the badly damaged Prince Group would lose its natural ally. In its weak period, it might be difficult for them to support until the next election. Therefore, Guo Wenyan and Li Tianlan had a very fierce conflict in the long debate. Even half an hour ago, Guo Wenyan was still arguing with Li Tianlan by pounding the table. Li Tianlan, who had never been too lazy to bang the table and get angry, was about to fight directly on the spot. If it weren't for Li Huaqing, Zhou Mulin, and others to stop him, he and Guo Wenyan wouldn't just fight in the highest level meeting. Li Tianlan's fight would be fatal. From this point of view, Li Tianlan was still very normal 10 minutes ago. 10 minutes later, what kind of state was he in? Tianlan. Zhou Mulin's heart began to sink. He frowned tightly and was a little worried. Now, everyone could feel Li Tianlan's sluggishness. This state was obviously abnormal. Li Tianlan sat there motionless, like a statue without the slightest breath of life. It seemed that it took a full minute for Zhou Mulin's voice to reach Li Tianlan's ears completely. Li Tianlan's fingertips on the armrest of the sofa moved slightly. His voice was getting slower and slower, with sluggishness and stiffness that gradually became clear. The astonishment on people's faces was more obvious. After a while, the directors understood what Li Tianlan was talking about. I'm fine. I need to think. You go on. It was just that they didn't know what was wrong with Li Tianlan's mind, or something in martial arts had distorted the space. The order of the content they heard was completely confused. Really, don't worry about me? Don't worry about me, really. Zhou Mulin took a deep breath and was a little confused for a moment. Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan in a daze and seemed to forget what he wanted to say for a moment. Guo Wenyan was the first to come to his senses. He was almost ecstatic. He was not interested in knowing what was going on with Li Tianlan. He only knew that Li Tianlan was very abnormal now. From his point of view, it was best for Li Tianlan to take advantage of the situation and die. But he also knew that it was impossible. However, Li Tianlan's state made everyone a little uneasy. For a moment, the aggressive sharpness of Zhou Mulin and Zhou Yunhai seemed to fade a lot. Guo Wenyan, who keenly grasped this opportunity, directly suggested, "President, I suggest that His Highness Li Tianlan be directly sent to the hospital. This is also a concern for him. The problem of Phoenix Pavilion is a very serious problem. I suggest informing Huating's city government immediately. Huating Parliament will take the lead in the investigation and report to us as soon as possible after getting detailed information." Li Huaqing glanced at Guo Wenyan. He understood the other party's idea. Ethereal Academy of Arts was now the key to prove the nature of Phoenix Pavilion. And the address of the Academy of Arts was in Huating. Guo Wenyan hoped that Huating Parliament would investigate first. There was no doubt that he intended to control the situation in his own hands. After all, Zhong Yongming, the current member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State and Speaker of Huating, was one of the leaders of the Prince Group, and was also the leader of the Prince Group that was not affected much after Qin Fangqing's death. Li Huaqing was a little confused. He nodded and then shook his head. He looked in the direction of Li Tianlan and suddenly felt a little dispirited. However, it was indeed a good opportunity to let Zhong Yongming control the situation. It was not a bad thing, but he had to learn the details of the Ethereal Academy of Arts in detail later. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, nodded, and was about to speak. Bang! The door of the conference room was suddenly pushed open. Ma Si, who looked a little impatient and complicated, pushed the door open and wanted to say something. He held an envelope in his hand and looked a little hesitant. What's going on? Li Huaqing was a little stunned. President, Ma Si took a deep breath. His voice was erratic, and his eyes were also erratic. Is there a new confession? Li Huaqing's heart had sunk to the bottom. Kunlun City had almost no checks and balances in Zhongzhou State. After so many years of development, he didn't feel strange about what Gu Xingyun had done in private with his power. No, it's not a new confession. It's a letter of report. Ma Si swallowed and said with difficulty, it's a real name report. Someone reported Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City and the minister of Special Operations Department of Zhongzhou State, and brought a lot of evidence. Li Huaqing's expression suddenly froze. Ma Si's erratic voice continued. The informant is is the only student of His Highness Gu Xingyun, Gu Xianyan of Kunlun City. She is now in the interrogation room. It's Boss Qin who sent her here. Chapter 1127. Qin Weibai. Gu Xingyun's only student. Ma Si's erratic voice fell in the ears of several giants, but it brought endless solemnity and depression. At this moment, not only Guo Wenian, who had just breathed a sigh of relief, but even Li Huaqing felt a little numb. They might or might not have realized that compared with Li Tianlan's strength, terror, and even madness, they were more worried about Qin Weibai, who now seemed to have restrained all her sharpness and stayed by Li Tianlan's side gently and obediently. This young couple brought completely different feelings to Zhongzhou State and trouble that no one wanted to provoke. Now no one denied Li Tianlan's combat capability. His terror had long been deeply rooted in people's hearts. It was irresistible sharpness and sharpness. Li Tianlan was invincible. But he was still young, and his heart and character to some extent fully matched his age. This year, Li Tianlan would be 24 years old. At the age of 24, it was really hard to say that it was a mature age. His combat capability was already at the peak, but in other aspects, he still needed a lot of things, such as learning, experience, tempering, and even lessons. The new group didn't rise for a long time, so Li Tianlan didn't deal with many things. But judging from the small number of things he dealt with, he did seem a little inexperienced in strategizing in terms of wisdom. His means might be extremely tough, but he could deal with every move. As long as he didn't completely turn hostile, within the rules, Li Tianlan's performance was not as irresistible as his personal combat capability. But Qin Weibai, her style could not be said to be the complete opposite of Li Tianlan's. Her means were also indescribable. Yes, it was indescribable. Zhongzhou State had never understood Qin Weibai from beginning to end. Whether it was Qin Weibai in the period of Samsara Palace or the period of Lin Clan, this young woman's mind had a maturity and mysteriousness that did not match her age at all. It could even be said to be wisdom. She was good at hiding all her thoughts in silence. Her step-by-step plan seemed to have no connection at all. When everything was revealed, people only saw the result, but there were still too many things that were unclear about the process and her entire plan. She seemed to be completely shrouded in fog. She remained calm and did whatever she wanted. When everyone was confused or even unaware, she had already completed one arrangement after another. She had absolute control over the details, and the overall situation was magnificent. She would not show any purpose in advance, and sometimes she would even be ignored, intentionally or unintentionally. But when she really appeared in front of everyone, it often meant that the overall situation was set. At this time, Qin Weibai sent Gu Xianyan to the courtyard of the Qin family. The complicated relationship between the two of them did not need to be explored for the time being. The important thing is to be a good girl beside Li Tianlan quietly. The petite woman once again appeared in front of everyone in a situation that no one expected. This also meant that she had absolute confidence in destroying Kunlun City. Absolute confidence. Li Huaqing's breathing quickened a few times. The invisible pressure had already hit him in the face like a substance. He could ignore Li Tianlan's combat capability, the new group, Qin Weibai, and many other aspects. But when these gathered together to force him to make certain decisions, how could he really not care? The oppressive silence lasted for a full 5 minutes. Li Huaqing reached out to touch the teacup and finally said, "Invite her in." He was talking about her, not them. Ma Si nodded and turned to call Gu Xianyan. Li Huaqing held the teacup and sipped the tea, expressionless. Guo Wenyan wanted to say something, but he opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. He glanced at Li Tianlan again. Li Tianlan's body became more and more stiff. In the somewhat dark and silent conference room, the sound of whispered discussion after the silence, the faint light, time passed slowly. Everything around him seemed to be getting farther and farther away from Li Tianlan quietly. It was an indescribable feeling. His whole mind and even his soul seemed to be carefully pulled out of his body by a gentle and natural force. The incomparably real three-dimensional perspective was directly projected from his mind. Li Tianlan saw the whole conference room clearly in an instant. Sitting in the main seat, Li Huaqing's face was slightly pale, and a little sweat was seeping out of every pore on his body. His internal organs were a little tight, and his heart beat a little abnormal. The speed of blood flowing in his blood vessels was obviously a little faster. Every cell in his bone marrow was turbulent. The overall state looked extremely serious, but it was still normal. Guo Wenyan looked expressionless, but his whole body had long been soaked in cold sweat. A lot of sweat accumulated under his armpits, abdomen, and knees. In the incomparably three-dimensional perspective, his heart beat extremely violently. As he breathed, the blood in his body rushed and whistled, as if it was about to break through the blood vessels. Li Tianlan was very sure that now, as long as he moved his finger, he could directly take away Guo Wentian's heart or any other organ from another direction that didn't exist in reality without touching Guo Wentian. The perspective turned quickly and kept rising. In the twinkling of an eye, the entire Qin family's compound appeared completely in front of him. Every single person's physical state and, to a certain extent, their psychological activities, every house, every brick, every plant, every ant in the Qin family's courtyard, every brick, every tile, every blade of grass, every ant, every cell. The details were displayed crazily. Hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, tens of billions of details flashed crazily in Li Tianlan's mind. All of this lasted less than a second. Before Li Tianlan's mind accepted a large number of details, the extended perspective had suddenly shrouded the entire Yuzhou city. In an instant, all the details of the entire Yuzhou were completely displayed in front of Li Tianlan. Countless buildings, countless people, countless details, on the ground, underground, inside and outside the buildings, and above the sky. Hundreds of trillions of details flashed crazily in Li Tianlan's mind. Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little scared and confused. At this moment, he seemed to really feel the power that belonged to God. His mind and soul seemed to have completely left his body. So when the perspective left the conference room, he almost lost the power to interfere with reality. Trillions of city details were crazily tumbling in the field of his mind. This feeling was hard to describe. It was a feeling of being omnipotent and omnipresent. Li Tianlan completely believed that if such a perspective didn't appear in his mind but in front of him, then he could easily destroy the entire urban area of Yuzhou nearly 100 kilometers away and kill millions of people in that urban area as long as he casually raised his hand. Of course, the premise was that he could withstand the impact of countless details in front of him. The biggest possibility was that when countless details really appeared in front of him, his brain would be completely blown up by the massive details and he would die on the spot. But there was no limit to all of this in his mind. The perspective in his mind kept rotating. Although Li Tianlan couldn't do any damage, his perspective was constantly rising. Countless details of the entire Yuzhou were instantly recorded and then directly forgotten. The perspective in front of him suddenly covered northern city, Yanzhou, Dongshan, and several provinces near Yuzhou. A massive number of details were completely presented in the perspective of his mind in an instant. This also meant that as long as Li Tianlan's soul was strong enough to withstand these details with his own vision, he could easily destroy several provinces or even half of Zhongzhou state with one blow. All of this was theoretically possible. But as the entire perspective kept rising, the entire Zhongzhou state completely appeared in front of Li Tianlan. At this moment, Li Tianlan finally saw another figure in his mind. A figure like him but wearing a black windbreaker. The figure stood in the center of his mind with his eyes closed. It was obvious that he was using his mind and special perspective to constantly search for something in the entire Zhongzhou state and even the whole world. To be exact, he was searching for something. Chapter 1128. With Yuzhou City as the center, the special perspective in Li Tianlan's mind zoomed in crazily. Changing, constantly changing. Endless details appeared and magnified countless times every second and every millisecond. Dongshan, Yanzhou, Zhongyuan, Liaodong, Liaobei, Longjiang. In an instant, The incomparably special perspective had covered several provinces. Li Tianlan's mind had become completely stagnant because of the huge number of details. In his mind, several provinces, hundreds of millions of people, and a large number of buildings were all completely and clearly reflected from different angles. Li Tianlan's mind and Ruthless Will had been completely connected as one. He didn't know what was going on now, but he could be sure that Ruthless change began a few days ago when he received the energy from the sea. Ruthless, whose energy was almost completely exhausted, regained his activity again because of that energy. But that energy seemed to contain something else that Li Tianlan didn't feel at that time. As time went by, Ruthless, who had recovered some energy, became more and more closely connected with him. It seemed that they had merged into one. So when Ruthless was trying to search for something, his will was naturally closely connected with Li Tianlan's mind, producing a terrifying resonance that allowed Li Tianlan to see hundreds of millions of people in several provinces at a glance. At this moment, everyone in several provinces, every detail of their bodies, every drop of blood, and every cell clearly appeared in Li Tianlan's mind. His mind had been stretched to the limit and could collapse at any time. And Ruthless Will seemed to have reached its limit. Li Tianlan, who could not think of anything, seemed to vaguely feel that the black trench coat in his mind was constantly trembling. In the next second, tens of billions and even more details were rapidly shrinking. Li Tianlan couldn't see the specific things from those details. Even if he could see them, he couldn't think. Ruthless seemed to filter a large number of targets from a large number of details. In just a breath's time, countless details of several provinces disappeared. Li Tianlan's fingers moved slightly, and the voice in the conference room rang in his ear. It's Gu Xianyan. There was only half a sentence, and it seemed to be a self-introduction. Just as Li Tianlan's thoughts turned, his perspective rose again. In the blink of an eye, countless details quickly piled up in his mind, densely packed and endless. Not Yan Zhao, not Dongshun. Wu Qin continued to search. After several provinces were completely filtered, a boundless grassland and tents, cattle and sheep dotted on the grassland appeared in Li Tianlan's thinking perspective. It was like Great Meng, which was adjacent to Yuzhou. His vision expanded wantonly with Great Meng as the center. Jinzhou, Suzhou, Xining, Tibet, Beijiang. Countless details increased and decreased. The Ruthless Will seemed to be getting clearer and more agile. It seemed to have learned its lesson just now and began to consciously increase and decrease the details. It quickly filtered through the trillions of details. A city, a place, a province, Tianfu, Qinzhou, Wuyue, Puding, and Jiangxia. Most of the details disappeared as soon as they appeared. The filtering speed of Ruthless search was getting faster and faster. Li Tianlan didn't know what it was looking for at all. He just watched it drive him to change his vision quickly. North Lake, Southwest City, Yunzhou, Jiang. A large number of details appeared and disappeared faster and faster. Minnan, Nanyue, Xie. A great deal while searching, Li Tianlan's nostrils suddenly became hot. Bright red blood suddenly flowed down from his nostrils. Then the eyes. Then the corners of his mouth. Then the ears. A lot of blood instantly covered Li Tianlan's face. His mind was always in a state of extreme tension, and his vitality was passing away quickly. Bang! An incomparably surging heartbeat suddenly sounded. The conference room shook violently, as if it had experienced an earthquake without warning. The sudden force surged and exploded in all directions of the conference room. In the crisp sound, all the teacups in front of several giants exploded. At the same time, the water droplets splashed, including the conference table, the chairs, and everything else were all twisted and deformed. Li Tianlan, who was bleeding from his 7 orifices, moved his body. The violent beating of the second heart instantly made up for all his vitality and the huge consumption of willpower. His body slowly relaxed. Li Tianlan, what do you want to do? Guo Wenin, who was shocked and angry, suddenly stood up and almost instinctively exerted pressure on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's eyes opened slightly. With his whole face covered in blood, he looked extraordinarily ferocious, but extraordinarily calm. When Guo Wenin saw his face, He suddenly froze in place. Everyone was stunned and couldn't speak for a while. Li Tianlan's eyes swept across the conference room and stopped on Gu Xianyan, who was a little confused. Then he reached out and wiped his face. His palm quickly cooled down and condensed into frost. The moment the frost touched his face, it turned into warm water and washed away the blood on his face. The water droplets with blood gathered in his palm and turned into tiny pieces of ice. The sword energy surged in the conference room. Li Tianlan lowered his head slightly and looked at the pieces of ice in his palm. The faint light shone on the tiny pieces of ice, and a shadow in a black windbreaker emerged from each piece of ice. He was completely connected with Ruthless sword energy. At this time, he could clearly see Ruthless standing in the small reception room in the interrogation room. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "What are you looking for?" He could clearly feel Ruthless will just now. In a very short period of time, Ruthless will was completely connected with his mind and triggered the special perspective in his mind. He could almost see through the entire Yuzhou in an instant. Ruthless was obviously looking for something. Or maybe he was looking for someone. In an instant, he searched all the provinces and cities in Zhongzhou state except Beihai province. Ruthless was silent. He could only remain silent. Although he had his own consciousness, he could not speak. And through his will, Li Tianlan could clearly feel the confusion in the other's will. Li Tianlan looked at him quietly and was silent for a long time. A fundamental particle was spinning in the room in a form invisible to the naked eye. The bright and soft lights of the hotel suite filled every corner. The particle rotated slowly, constantly exchanging information with the fundamental particle on the other side. A virtual screen appeared in the quiet room. The screen was not played from any device, but was directly projected from the air to the front, and was divided into many virtual windows that were constantly zooming in and out. The two largest windows were the scenes of the conference room and the interrogation room of the Chen family's compound. The other small windows were the current behavior of everyone in the Chen family's compound. All the sounds in the picture were going on at the same time. Sitting in the hotel suite, one could perceive the changing situation of Zhongzhou state just by listening to the sound without even looking at the picture. The whole process of the interrogation, the fierce game of recording confessions, the quarrel between Li Tianlan and Guo Wenyin, Li Huaqing's hesitation, Zhou Mulin's strength, Zhou Yunhai's firmness, and the Southeast group's indifference. The picture paused, accelerated, and rewound from time to time. Most of the time, the picture in the conference room was focused on Li Tianlan. He sat in a dark corner, and no one in the conference room could see his expression. When this picture appeared on the virtual screen, the light on the screen seemed to be brighter from another level. Not only Li Tianlan's expression, but even every pore on his face clearly appeared on the screen. The normally played picture stopped again. The picture in the conference room occupied everything. Several lines of sight met on the virtual screen. On the screen, Li Tianlan looked down at the broken ice stained with blood in his palm, silent and frozen like a statue. Sure enough, protecting his majesty has become King Wei's deepest instinct. Looking at the picture on the screen, Lin Shi suddenly said. His tone was a little complicated with unconcealable respect and envy. It's just the instinct of the body. Xianyuan Wushang, who was also watching this scene, said in a low voice, I haven't observed the core of the Lin clan at a close distance, but the core of King Wei in Beihai is obviously in a strange state. Lin Shi was silent and did not speak. He came to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in the afternoon. The Prince of the War God's realm and the Prince of the Space-Time Corridor had the same identity, but they were completely different people. Under normal circumstances, it was difficult for them to sit together. But at this time, they silently observed the trend of the situation in Zhongzhou state together, and there was an indescribable harmony. It was harmony, not harmony. This was like the relationship between the space-time corridor, the war god's realm, and the emperor palace. They were far from harmonious, and conflicts occurred from time to time. But on some issues, they had always advanced and retreated together, competing and cooperating, very harmonious. Her Highness seems to have been to Dongshan. Lin Shi said slowly, part of King Wei's energy originally returned to Yuzhou from Dongshan, and it seems to contain some memory fragments of King Wei. We can be sure that it was Her Highness who activated King Wei's memory fragments. The corner of Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched, and he said playfully, "You dare to monitor Her Highness? We are paying attention to King Wei." Lin Shi said lightly, "As a member of the human clan, this is our duty." "What a good obligation." Xianyuan Wushang sneered. "Okay, I accept your explanation. But you don't seem to have answered my question. What is the situation with the core of King Wei in Beihai Province?" Lin Shi raised his eyebrows slightly. "We have always been paying close attention to King Wei." Xianyuan Wushang said flatly, "So we can be sure that King Wei was still in a normal state more than 20 years ago. But during our recent close observation, he was contaminated. Shouldn't the war god's realm give us an explanation?" "This is our mistake." Lin Shi's voice became a little low. "This time, solving the problem of King Wei is also one of my tasks. The real time was more than 20 years ago, in the miracle city of the war god's realm. When Her Highness Qin Weibai was at her most unstable, she stabbed Jiang Shangyu with her sword." Chapter 1129. 30 years ago, Lin Xianyuan, the war god of the war god realm, split Miracle City. For the neutral camp outside of Miracle City, this was no secret. This meant that the war god realm and the human emperor palace were completely independent of the space-time corridor. It meant that both the human sovereign and the war god had reached the peak of the camp's strength. It meant that the human race had another choice and path. It meant that everyone had a different understanding of many things. But not many people understood the aftermath of the war god's sword. 30 years had passed in reality. In Xianyuan Wushang's concept of time, it was about 40,000 years ago. In the concept of time synchronized with the space-time corridor, Xianyuan Wushang, who was awake most of the time, was equivalent to 50,000 to 60,000 years in the space-time corridor. If either the human sovereign or the war god had always been awake, then the time flow in the space-time corridor wouldn't be much different from the war god realm and the human emperor palace. In these tens of thousands of years, the space-time corridor, the human emperor palace, and the war god realm had been carrying out a top-secret plan of the highest degree since Miracle City had been split. In the space-time corridor, this plan was codenamed Return Plan. In the war god realm, this plan was codenamed Split Plan. In the human emperor palace, this plan was codenamed Copy Plan. They had different names, but the general goal of the three sides was basically the same. The division of Miracle City seemed very simple, but that level of power was almost at the peak level of the three major factions. The whole splitting operation was simple and complicated. First of all, His Majesty the Space-Time Cloister would instantly release all his defenses to protect the Miracle City. In an instant, a large number of universal constants in the entire galaxy would become normal. In this extremely short period of time, the physics and astronomy of the entire galaxy would be biased towards the direction of the universe as a whole. To a certain extent, there would be a deviation from the physics and astronomy of the Miracle City that had the universal constants modified. And the moment the universal constants of the Milky Way galaxy became the same as the whole universe, the war god would immediately appear at the key node. This was the node of fate. Everything from heaven and earth to the starry sky, as small as a fundamental particle, as large as a complete universe, had its own fate. In the Milky Way galaxy, Miracle City naturally had its own fate. What the war god needed to do was to grasp the fate of Miracle City in an extremely short period of time. He would directly make a move and completely destroy the entire Miracle City. The sword light from his attack was still lingering in the sky above Miracle City, connected to a large number of defenses in the space-time corridor. After tens of thousands of years, the two sides had completely merged. Therefore, on the night of the decisive battle in Beihai, when Xing Tian used his authority to change the physical constants in a small range and shot an invincible realm expert of the sanctuary to death with one arrow, a tiny loophole appeared in this world with Xing Tian as the center. Or rather, it was a bug in the real world. This kind of bug was not rare in general, but it was the first time in the field of martial arts. This was not a big deal, because such a small loophole was almost negligible. Even if it appeared, it would be fixed in an instant. But the moment this bug appeared, in that second or even half a second, Ruthless, who was full of energy, grasped this loophole, and Li Tianlan, who was connected to Ruthless will, also grasped this loophole. So Li Tianlan directly felt the sword qi left by Lin Shenyuan when he split Miracle City more than 30 years ago in real time. That sword was called Break of Reincarnation. That was the plausible sword that Li Tianlan simulated when facing Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu. All of this was beyond the expectations of all the forces. Of course, now it seemed that it was no longer important. What was important was the influence of War God after he split Spacetime Corridor. His Majesty of Spacetime Corridor. War God of War God Realm. Human Emperor of Human Palace. In today's Human Clan, they were almost the top 3 strongest combat forces of the Human Clan. And the split of Miracle City was also a tacit cooperation between the 3 of them. They carried out 3 different plans, but in fact, they could be regarded as one. His Majesty of Spacetime Corridor let go of the protection of the Milky Way and Miracle City. And War God split Miracle City with his sword. To be exact, he split the fate of Miracle City and the entire Milky Way. Whether it was an individual human being or a massive celestial body, the so-called fate would be connected to itself. At the moment when War God's sword light split Milky Way and Miracle City, Human Emperor of Human Palace stood on the fate node of the universe and restarted reincarnation. Tier, reincarnation, protection. Everything happened at the same time. That was why the God of War had torn apart the Miracle City with a single sword strike, but the Miracle City had returned to its original state under the reincarnation of the human sovereign. In reality, the Miracle City had been truly severed. Amidst all sorts of contradictions, the Time Corridor's Princess Royal Feng Qingwu had deceived the will of the world in a short period of time. So an incomprehensible but objective space-time paradox appeared in the cooperation of the peak figures of the neutral camp. The worlds will could not determine the state of Miracle City and lost its lock on Miracle City once again. The Miracle City of Space-Time Corridor still existed. And the separated Miracle City began to belong to War God Realm and Human Palace. This formed 2 Miracle Cities and 2 Milky Way galaxies. The Milky Way galaxies existed objectively. As for the real Miracle City, everything was real. But the same Milky Way galaxy and the same real Miracle City appeared in 2 different parallel spaces the moment the world's will was deceived. If the world was a river, then after this cooperation, this surging river had 2 almost equal tributaries, and as the river surged, the 2 tributaries flowed farther and farther in their own direction. Therefore, in tens of thousands of meaningless years, with the Miracle City as the center, the fate of being separated continued, and finally formed a parallel universe that was completely different from the space-time corridor, but similar to the space-time corridor to a certain extent. This was a man-made parallel universe. It could be said to be the foundation of Human Palace and War God Realm. For tens of thousands of years, the parallel space continued to spread, and today, the parallel universe had expanded to nearly 6 trillion light-years. And this territory was completely parallel to Space-Time Corridor, which was the headquarters of War God Realm and Human Palace. 2 completely real Miracle Cities would naturally produce people and items that lived in 2 different spaces. But at the moment when Miracle City was separated, their fates had a slight error, so they did not have the same experience. For example, Gu Xianyan in the past and Qin Weibai now. For example, Dongqing Huangtu in the past and Li Tianlan now. For example, the current Wang family of Beihai and the Wang family of Beihai in that story. For example, Qingwei. They were the same person in different spaces, but in a sense, they were equivalent to one person, not even a different personality of one person. They only had a little difference in experience, but their general character and thinking were completely the same. Because they were the same person. This was the so-called return plan, division plan, or replication plan. The 3 majesties standing at the peak level of the human clan all hoped to turn Li Tianlan, Qin Weibai, King Wei, and some others from 1 to 2, so that they could grow up in different spaces and merge at a certain node of fate. Whether it was Li Tianlan or Qin Weibai, They all had their own real brand, which would not have any impact on them, but would greatly accelerate the process of their return. But this plan had just started when it met with an accident. First of all, in the space of War God realm, Gu Xianyan did not appear beside Li Tianlan, but in Kunlun City. Second, Dongqing Huangtu in the Wang family of Beihai, because of the influence of the core of King Wei, set foot in the real world, the real supreme field of martial arts, and even vaguely touched the law of Sword Tao. From that moment on, things were almost irreversible. A large part of Li Tianlan or Dongqing Huangtu's real brand was with Qin Weibai or Gu Xianyan in that space and time. Their fates were completely connected. When Gu Xianyan's spiritual domain had not completely broken through and completed the transformation to accept too much information, Dongqing Huangtu went to the supreme domain first, and his real brand was not enough for him to have that kind of authority. So the fate was out of balance and completely out of control became the inevitable outcome. So in that space and time, Dongqing Huangtu died in the hands of Gu Xianyan. The death of Dongqing Huangtu caused Gu Xianyan's fate to be completely out of control. Her Highness, who was completely crazy at that time, retaliated against everyone, including herself and the whole world. Holding King Wei, she herself was at the peak of the invincible realm. With the cooperation of King Wei, she was almost invincible in the world. Kunlun City was completely destroyed. All the superpowers in the Dark World were also completely destroyed. Wang Tianzong died. Finally, in Mount Dibing, she faced Wang Shengshao and Jiang Shangyu with King Wei and died with them. Gu Xianyan also died there. The fate of Dongqing Huangtu and Gu Xianyan was completely out of control. At this point, the duplication, division, and return plan could almost be said to have failed to some extent. And this was the responsibility of the War God realm and the Human Emperor Palace. In the face of the wrath of the space-time corridor, the Human Emperor Palace and the War God realm had to compensate the space-time corridor with a lot of resources. At the same time, the Human Emperor of the Human Emperor Palace once again restarted the reincarnation. The fate of Dongqing Huangtu and Gu Xianyan was fixed. The space-time corridor transferred the real imprints of the two people on the fate node. Simply put, the space-time corridor transferred the fate of the two people and the fate and real imprints of King Wei from the space and time of the War God realm to, in the space and time of the space-time corridor. Dongqing Huangtu's real imprint and Li Tianlan in this space and time smoothly merged, because they were originally one person. But no one expected that the real imprint of Gu Xianyan actually maintained a symbiotic state with the Qin Weibai in this space and time and did not choose to merge. This was not too big a problem. The only problem was that the Qin Weibai in this world suddenly became two. The real imprints on them existed at the same time, and they formed a whole. So now the two Qin Weibai were completely different people on the surface, but in fact they were one person. The return plan continued under the attention of the space-time corridor. Until Shenyuan Wushang came to the Miracle City and landed on Mount Dibing, everything seemed to be extremely smooth. In fact, until now, the return of Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai had been very smooth. But there was a problem with King Wei. The attention of the space-time corridor to King Wei was not low at all. The first divine weapon of the neutral camp, the cornerstone of the world, the left hand of the human emperor, the guardian of the human clan, and King Wei's identity was enough to make the space-time corridor attach great importance and concern to him. They would often observe the state of King Wei. What was certain was that King Wei had always been normal in the Miracle City of the space-time corridor. The space-time corridor could confirm that the core of King Wei was polluted after the transfer from the space and time of the other King Wei in the War God realm to this space and time. This kind of pollution was extremely hidden. If not for close observation, Shenyuan Wushang would not have found it so far. It was the War God realm and the Human Emperor Palace again. In this series of plans, because of their short rise time and lack of foundation, they made too many mistakes. Shenyuan Wushang looked at Lin Shi silently and did not speak for a long time. Lin Shi admitted that this was their mistake. This kind of words from one prince to another meant that the War God realm and the Human Emperor Palace had begun to negotiate with the space-time corridor on this issue. That is to say, the pollution of King Wei has something to do with Jiang Shangyu? Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a while and suddenly asked seriously. This is the only explanation, but there is not enough evidence. Lin Shi said quietly. He waved his hand, and the transparent screen in front of him changed slightly. The conference room disappeared, and so did the interrogation room. Only the figure in the black trench coat was left in the small reception room, standing quietly in the small space. He seemed to be in a daze, deep in thought. Your Majesty, you know very well that he is not the ancestor of the Wang family, but it can be said that he is the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai and the first heavenly son of the Wang family of Beihai. Lin Shi said blandly, he has come all the way and now stands at the peak. The Wang family of Beihai is all his descendants. If his descendants show signs of pollution, he can detect something wrong through the fate node. But in fact, everyone in the Wang family of Beihai is very normal. After the split plan failed, we observed the fate nodes of His Majesty Li Tianlan, Qin Weibai, and His Highness King Wei from beginning to end, and carefully analyzed Her Highness Qin Weibai's last battle on Mount Dibing. We had a detailed analysis and evaluation of the state of Her Highness and King Wei at that time, and also an accurate analysis of Wang Shengshao and Jiang Shangyu's combat capability at that time. It was a comprehensive analysis of low-level authority, and we had many simulations. So we can almost be sure that in the battle on Mount Dibing with Her Highness Qin Weibai's state, if it had developed normally, King Wei would have exhausted all his energy, and Her Highness Qin Weibai would have died completely. This was the most normal ending. In such an ending, the possibility of Wang Shengshao and Jiang Shangyu dying was less than 45%. Xianyuan Wushang frowned. Lin Shi was silent for a moment and then said, but the fact is completely different from the most normal development. In the end, King Wei still maintained a negligible energy. Although Her Highness Qin Weibai was seriously injured and dying, she did not die completely. This is also the main reason for today's situation. His Majesty restarted the reincarnation cycle. If Her Highness Qin Weibai died completely, her real imprint would be reborn in the current Qin Weibai, along with her memory and martial arts. There would not be a second highness who was exactly the same. Fusion is instinct. Xianyuan Wushang said calmly, it's also the rule. It's true. Lin Shi nodded. But we speculate that maybe from the moment the battle on Mount Dibing ended, Her Highness Qin Weibai and King Wei had been contaminated. The information we got from the time corridor shows that Her Highness Qin Weibai's real imprint is extremely special. This kind of special may have prevented the rule and instinct. To some extent, although the two highnesses now coexist in the same time and space, the split has been successful. We have successfully replicated another Her Highness Qin Weibai. Xianyuan Wushang was silent. How is Her Highness now? Lin Shi glanced at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang knew that he was not talking about the current Qin Weibai, but the one who was sleeping in the Lin clan. It was no secret that he had gone to the miracle city belonging to the war god realm through Qin Weibai's consciousness. It's still very dangerous, but it's also very important. Her consciousness directly affects whether this one can succeed or not. But I didn't feel any contamination in the depths of Her Highness's consciousness. Huh, Lin Shi laughed. If the depths of Her Highness's consciousness are really like what you said in the report to the time corridor, like an eternal furnace, then what kind of contamination can stay in her consciousness for a long time? Purification is the inevitable result. Xianyuan Wushang nodded thoughtfully. He was not surprised that Lin Shi could see the report he submitted to the time corridor. This level of top-secret information was shared among the top levels of the entire neutral camp. When Her Highness successfully wakes up, and when this one begins to return, the two highnesses will be one. They can merge at will, or choose to be independent. The split plan, or the duplication plan, has been completely successful with Her Highness Qin Weibai, and the results have even exceeded expectations. There was no longer a question of who was dominant between the two highnesses, because they could fuse and split at any time. Their current state was equivalent to having the same thoughts as their own, and they were each other's avatars. When they completely returned and fused, their strength would almost certainly surpass what they were in the past. This is the biggest gain of this plan. You call this a gain? Xianyuan Wushang was expressionless. Qin Weibai could break through the past after her return, which was naturally something to be happy about. But this so-called gain was not proportional to the investment of the three sides. The separation of the Miracle City could be said to be one of the biggest moves in the history of the human clan. It was a miracle in the fate of the camp. The whole process had been prepared for countless years, and a lot of manpower and resources were consumed. Almost all the top figures in the neutral camp had gone all out, and in the end, a relatively perfect situation was left to the three strongest. Then Xianyuan Wushang's father found the key node of the fate of the universe. Such a miracle was almost irreproducible. If time and space could be separated at will, the starry sky today would not be in such a state. Of course, the separation of the Miracle City was not to let Li Tianlan and the others return, but it would take a long time for other plans to work. And the plan they had high hopes for only received some pitiful returns. This decision might not be a mistake in the long run, but specifically at present, it could not be regarded as brilliant. Lin Shi paused, completely ignoring Xianyuan Wushang's doubts, and continued, as for King Wei, he may have been contaminated in the battle on Mount Dibing. Jiang Shangyu and Wang Shengshao had the ability to kill Her Highness at that time. After all, before them, Wang Tianzong also made Her Highness pay a sufficient price. But in such a situation, Her Highness was seriously injured but did not die. The only explanation is that Jiang Shangyu did not do his best. After all, in the face of the enemy who killed his father, Wang Shengshao could not have held back. Jiang Shangyu, Xianyuan Wushang narrowed his eyes, and a cold, killing intent flashed in his eyes. Rebel, maybe. At that time, Jiang Shangyu may have thought that he had done his best, but in fact, until now, we still do not know what the symbiosis with Jiang Shangyu was. If the contamination of King Wei did come from something in Jiang Shangyu, then now we can be sure that Jiang Shangyu has turned to the chaotic camp. After all, King Wei's past experience is destined that he will not be contaminated by order. Isn't it obvious? Xianyuan Wushang said blandly, if integration is an instinct under normal circumstances, it is understandable that there are two His Highnesses, but it is inexplicable that there are two Jiang Shangyu. Two Jiang Shangyu? Lin Shi murmured. Are you sure there are only two? Anything can happen in the chaotic camp, because they have no rules. They can be incredibly powerful or as weak as ants. If they are affected by chaos, what are two Jiang Shangyu? To be honest, even if there are 200 Jiang Shangyus now, I will not be surprised. If the contamination of King Wei came from Jiang Shangyu, in that battle, His Highness only used King Wei to stab Jiang Shangyu. At most, the blade of King Wei was stained with Jiang Shangyu's blood. Just the contact of blood could contaminate King Wei. How powerful is the thing in Jiang Shangyu's body? The most important thing is that it is still in Jiang Shangyu's body. Xianyuan Wushang's voice was extremely low. This will be a big problem. This is our mistake. Lin Shi's voice was calm. Xianyuan Wushang had nothing to say. In the face of chaos, not only the weak war god realm and the Emperor Palace, but also the time-honored time corridor had no good way to deal with it. Chaos had different names in different people's mouths. Some called it shadow, some called it chaos. But the most basic mode of the chaotic camp was chaos and distortion. The human clan and the lawful camp had fought for countless reincarnations. The time corridor was very familiar with the doomsday of the order camp and some other peak creatures such as demons. As a chaotic camp that could run parallel with the lawful camp, they naturally had many peak experts, but almost no one knew about the time corridor. Because of chaos. Chaos, distortion, weirdness, without any rules. Perhaps the Chaos faction great leader who was fighting the war god to the death just a second ago would suddenly die in the next second. Perhaps his power would scatter all over the place and be distributed evenly among all the creatures of the Chaos faction. Perhaps it would appear on any random soul, allowing it to directly obtain power that could rival the war god. Or maybe the peak creature that could rival the enemy emperor would be in the proud starry sky a second ago. The next second, it would forget everything and crawl on the ground like an ignorant ant. Every opponent of the chaotic camp could not be locked on. Because every chaotic creature could be so powerful that it made people desperate, but at the same time, every chaotic creature could be so weak that it made people speechless. No one could tell who the thing in Jiang Shangyu's body was and what state it was in now. That thing can't be in a good state. At least we can be sure that it is not in its peak state. It may be weak or weak, Xianyuan Wushang said in a low voice. We can confirm this. Lin Shi nodded. To His Majesty Li Tianlan, to Her Highness Qin Weibai, and to King Wei. If that thing was in its peak state when King Wei was polluted, then King Wei would not be attracted by the instinct of fusion when he returned here. In the Battle of Mount Dibing, Her Highness Qin Weibai unconsciously forced Wuyo and Wuqing to merge. But such a fusion split again when he returned here. Wuyo merged with Wuyo in this space-time, while Wuqing exhausted his energy and slept at the bottom of Jiangzhe Lake. If that thing was in its peak state, it would have stopped all this. It might even have used King Wei to further pollute Her Highness Qin Weibai and His Majesty Li Tianlan. Fortunately, none of this happened. So, King Wei's body can be said to be complete and unpolluted now. Xianyuan Wushang said. More than complete. After all, King Wei has now merged with some murderous weapons that belong to this spacetime. That is also his body. Lin Shi said softly. Xianyuan Wushang nodded thoughtfully. King Wei seemed to have been to Beihai before, but he did not choose to merge with Wuyo. Maybe at that time, he had already realized something, but his understanding was not clear. Princess Royal gave King Wei some memory fragments a few days ago. From the perspective of memory, King Wei has also set foot on the road of return. His memory is becoming clear little by little, and his understanding of himself seems to be starting to become clear. So in this case, Xianyuan Wushang looked at the virtual screen in front of him. The man in the black trench coat stood silently, looking particularly silent and lonely. What do you think he is looking for? He is looking for Jiang Shangyu. Lin Shi suddenly narrowed his eyes. Maybe. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. King Wei has been with His Majesty for the longest time. His loyalty to His Majesty has become something engraved in his instinct. From this point of view, the two of them have the same thinking. He can know what His Majesty is thinking now. Obviously, His Majesty also wants to find Jiang Shangyu. And King Wei has some understanding of Wuyo's current state before. It can be said to be intuition, instinct, or anything. Princess Royal gave King Wei some memory fragments, which also made his self-awareness more clear, and he can clearly realize that his core has been polluted. If there are enough memory fragments, he can even determine where he was polluted, and then think of Jiang Shangyu. Lin Shi said. Xianyuan Wushang nodded and continued this topic. His Majesty wants to kill Jiang Shangyu, so does King Wei. Their thinking is synchronized again, and their goal is the same. How can the pollution be removed? Either it takes a long time and a lot of resources to remove it bit by bit, or it can be forcibly merged to suppress the pollution, or it can be killed at the source of the pollution, and the pollution will disappear. Obviously, King Wei thinks so. The standard style of King Wei, just like the legend. Lin Shi laughed. He was unscrupulous and lawless. He was the most arrogant and indulgent top figure in the history of the neutral camp. He was the only one who was not a human emperor but dared to call himself a legend. The cornerstone of the world, the pillar of the human clan. This was King Wei. Lin Shi looked at the transparent screen in front of him in a trance. He looked at the shadow that was lowering its head and thinking, and murmured, obviously, he wants to erase the pollution and find himself better. Xianyuan Wushang seemed to think of something and said calmly, obviously, with King Wei's current ability, he hasn't found Jiang Shangyu, which means that his hiding place is a bit strange. What do you think? Lin Shi understood what Xianyuan Wushang meant. He hesitated and said slowly, help King Wei to complete his body completely? It's meaningful, but not very meaningful. King Wei's body is now more complete than it was in the beginning. What limits his power is the real environment, the serious injury that he has yet to recover from, and the missing core. You want to rob the murderous weapon? Don't you care if the world is in chaos? Lin Shi was silent for a while, and then asked, then what do you mean? We can't merge now. We have to know how serious the pollution is. But we can merge Wuyo and Wuqing, and King Wei will become more complete. Wuyo is in the Lin clan, and he belongs to your family. According to seniority, you are the ancestor of the Lin clan. You can make this decision, right? Lin Shi narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, how can you be sure that Wuyo is not polluted? Huh, Xinyuan Wushang sneered. The other Wuyo is not here now, is he? He is still in the Miracle City in the realm of war. That doesn't mean anything. They are both the cores of King Wei. Although Wuyo is in a split state, the pollution can affect Wuyo. Don't worry, Wuyo can't be polluted. Neither the lawful camp nor the chaotic camp can pollute him. Xinyuan Wushang was silent for a while, and then he said slowly. Lin Shi was slightly moved, and then he said with a smile, I have some doubts. Xinyuan Wushang said, absent-mindedly. He already knew what Lin Shi wanted to ask. The apostles invaded the core databases of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan, as well as the databases of various countries, including Zhongzhou state, and found a document called The Origin of Murderous Weapons. Lin Shi looked at Xianyuan Wushang's reaction seriously. The specific origin of King Wei is unclear in the document. It only says that King Wei is an extraterrestrial meteorite. That's not important. What's important is that King Wei was split and destroyed, and he was made into 13 murderous weapons. His core was split into 2 and left in the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan respectively. Ninth Prince, don't you think it's strange? Xianyuan Wushang still didn't speak. Lin Shi's eyes flickered, and his double pupils opened and closed slightly, looking deep. With the technical level of Zhongzhou state at that time, it was a miracle to be able to split King Wei's body. Even if his body was split by chance and King Wei was seriously injured, it should be a whole with secret connections. But in fact, King Wei was in a split state now. His body became 13 murderous weapons, and the murderous weapons were connected to each other, so their integration was very smooth. But carefree and ruthless, the body and the 2 cores are now independent of each other. Well, even if we can ignore the previous time and reluctantly explain that Carefree's independence was because of pollution, why is Carefree? Right now, they were carefree, and emotionless, just like 3 independent individuals. With King Wei's level, how could he have fallen to such a state? Carefree was polluted, but Carefree was not. It's also unreasonable. Isn't Carefree the energy core? Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and didn't speak. I can take Carefree and let it integrate with King Wei. But I need to know what's going on. Lin Shi said calmly. Xianyuan Wushang silently lit a cigarette, took a deep breath, and then said slowly, in fact, you're right. Lin Shi raised his eyebrows. King Wei's current body, the core and Carefree are independent, which has the most direct relationship with His Majesty's death. In the smoke, Xianyuan Wushang's voice was a little erratic. Carefree is not King Wei's energy core. There's only one real energy core, and that's Carefree. Lin Shi's pupils suddenly shrank, and he subconsciously lowered his voice. Then what is Carefree? Xianyuan Wushang hesitated, and then slowly said, essentially, it's a divine image of His Majesty. That's a divine image of His Majesty. That's a divine image of His Majesty. That's a divine image of His Majesty. Lin Shi slowly straightened his body and silently looked at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang lowered his head and said nothing. The hotel room suddenly fell silent. Oh! After a full 5 minutes, Lin Shi slowly nodded. You mean Carefree is a divine image of His Majesty? Xianyuan Wushang nodded. Lin Shi took a deep breath, and his expression was a little twisted, but then he became calm again. His voice also became a little polite. May I ask which divine image it is? It's said to be a catastrophe, but who knows? Even His Majesty doesn't know now. Lin Shi nodded, and then murmured again, that's a divine image of His Majesty. Xianyuan Wushang coughed a little awkwardly. Xianyuan Wushang. Lin Shi's erratic voice echoed in the room. Your Highness, he stared straight at Xianyuan Wushang, and his voice suddenly condensed. His somewhat hollow voice also became a little angry. Damn fatty, I'll F***CKU. Chapter 1130. It was as if he had fallen into a deep pit and couldn't climb out. In Lin Shi's extremely long life, every time he had this feeling, it meant that he would have to pay a huge price even if he could survive. Worryless was one of His Majesty's divine forms. This was definitely a secret that only a few people in the space-time corridor knew. What did a divine form mean? It meant that it was one of the foundations of His Majesty's rise to the top. Although it was only one of the divine forms, although His Majesty hadn't returned, and although Lord Wei was seriously injured, it was not something they could resist. How dare the fat Xinyuan Wushang ask him to take Worryless? Was he doing that? Was he? Judging from the current state of Lord Wei's 3 separate parts, Lord Wei's body was still instinctively loyal. His soul, or energy core, had been contaminated to a certain extent, and the integration with Lord Wei's Real imprint came from the original His Majesty's figure, which was equivalent to having the original His Majesty and Lord Wei's common will. This kind of will might be very weak, but the instinct was always there. In this state, Worryless yearned for freedom the most. Therefore, it was now independent and unwilling to integrate with Lord Wei's body. In this case, if he went to take Worryless, it meant that he would have to fight Worryless head-on. He would have to face the original His Majesty's divine form. Lin Shi's deep eyes looked as if they were about to spit fire. He stared at Xinyuan Wushang for nearly 5 minutes. Then he asked in confusion and disbelief, "Do we have a grudge?" It was not as simple as a grudge. How much hatred did he have to have instigated him to take Worryless? No. Xinyuan Wushang said quietly. "You and I have no grudge, so why did you instigate me to die?" Lin Shi subconsciously clenched his fists. Don't get me wrong. Worryless' current state may not be as strong as you think. Xinyuan Wushang said indifferently, "Indeed, Wuru has merged with one of His Majesty's divine forms, but His Majesty has been dead for a long time and has yet to fully return. That divine form has long since dissipated, and it's now in a split state. Divine forms are related to oneself, so it is impossible for there to be 2 of them. Therefore, the specific state of the current divine form is that half of it is in this space-time, and the other half is in the space-time of the War God realm. That's why the current Worryless is only half a divine form. So you think I can subdue Wu Yu?" Lin Shi smiled strangely. "You really think highly of me? Not you, us." Xinyuan Wushang looked at Lin Shi. "Think about it carefully. 2 saints, a calligrapher, an Azura, and an apostle. What does it mean? The space-time corridor, the human emperor palace, the war god realm, and all the neutral factions combined, how many of such a lineup would they have? If we attack together, even if this half-divine form belongs to His Majesty, King Wei's condition is extremely poor. Do you think we can't succeed?" The mockery on Lin Shi's face gradually disappeared, and he fell into deep thought. He gave Xinyuan Wushang a deep look and repeated, "We." "Of course." Xinyuan Wushang said indifferently, "I don't plan on sending you to your death. I'm talking about joining hands." After a pause, he laughed self-deprecatingly. "Even if we really die, we'll do it together." Lin Shi continued to ponder. He added the apostles and the saints, together with Xinyuan Wushang and Xing Tian. Such a lineup, no matter what the occasion, could be considered an absolutely high-end and luxurious combination. Looking at the entire neutral faction, only a few of the top super armies would have such a lineup. This lineup referred to their strength. In fact, even those super armies couldn't be so extravagant as to have 2 saints. Azura, 2 saints, an apostle, and a calligrapher. Facing half a divine form that was so weak that it was about to dissipate, and King Wei, who was suffering from this half-divine form, was not in good condition and was also seriously injured. This kind of situation, it seemed, could probably give it a try? Lin Shi seriously thought for a long time, then took a deep breath and said softly, "The apostles have been warned by Her Highness before. They had encountered Feng Qingwu as soon as they arrived at Miracle City. Feng Qingwu's warning was for the three of them. Her attention was focused on Lin Shi, but they all knew very well that Feng Qingwu's main target was the apostles. The neutral faction already had a clear idea of just how destructive an old apostle in perfect condition could be. It wasn't even the slightest exaggeration to say that in front of a true apostle, Miracle City was even weaker than a piece of paper. It was just like sand. Xianyuan Wushang silently looked at Lin Shi as if he was looking at an idiot. Her Highness is mainly afraid that you will destroy Miracle City out of impulse, right? That's part of the reason. Lin Shi smiled bitterly. But I think it's also because of His Majesty. In short, in Miracle City, Her Highness doesn't allow saints to go all out. F***CK. You want to go all out in Miracle City? Go all out? Xianyuan Wushang let out a strange cry. The corner of Lin Shi's mouth twitched. Don't you know what a saint is like in a real environment? His destructive power is indeed unquestionable, but with his current strength, how can he do anything to that half-divine form in a real environment? No, that's not a problem. In Miracle City, it's even difficult for us to lock onto him all the time. Xianyuan Wushang said quickly. So? Lin Shi glanced at Xianyuan Wushang. The apostles have already mastered the space transfer technology, haven't they? Seal off an area, fold up that space, and bring that space to a place far away from Miracle City. At that time, we can do whatever we want. Her Royal Highness won't interfere. After all, she also wants to see King Wei gradually become complete. Xianyuan Wushang's tone was getting faster and faster. And after King Wei has this half-divine form, his memory fragments will become clearer. If he can deal with Jiang Shangyu this time, we will save a lot of effort. Lin Shi pondered and finally nodded. Both King Wei and Li Tianlan's current state was extremely special. They had the real brand, but in the case that the real brand hadn't really awakened, they couldn't get access to authority for the time being. At most, they could only get some characteristics of authority. This made them look completely different from Lin Shi and Xianyuan Wushang. No one was sure what the state of the thing behind Jiang Shangyu that belonged to the chaotic camp was. But no matter what it was, if only King Wei and Li Tianlan took action, it wouldn't alarm him for the time being. If Jiang Shangyu could deal with it, Lin Shi would have solved a big problem. And this itself was a mistake of the War Immortal Realm and the Human Emperor Palace. Lin Shi naturally hoped to make up for this mistake. To make up for it, the only thing he needed to do now was to face the seriously injured King Wei and the half-divine form that was about to dissipate. This was a risk, but it didn't seem too dangerous. He suddenly looked at Xianyuan Wushang and asked, "There's one thing I don't understand. If Wuyo is really a divine form of His Majesty and has merged with King Wei, then why was King Wei almost assimilated by the order at that time?" Because of his own imprint, the story of King Wei being assimilated by order was also circulated in the real world. For the current Zhongzhou state, it was a well-known legend that had been circulating for a long time. But when it came to King Wei and the corridor of time and space, it was a great humiliation. No one was perfect. Even if they were on the same level as the gods and the world, no one was perfect. Everyone in the corridor of time and space welcomed the return of the first His Majesty. Everyone was looking forward to Li Tianlan's growth. But the increasingly sparse memories and all kinds of vague signs showed that His Majesty, who had personally opened the neutral camp and laid the foundation of the human clan, was also a tyrant rarely seen throughout the ages, even though he was a saint of the human clan. Within the human clan, his contributions were undeniable, and he deserved everyone's respect and admiration. But his mistakes also couldn't be ignored. After His Majesty died, Great Emperor Xianyuan hadn't completely absorbed the power he left. During that time, it was King Wei who propped up the backbone of the entire neutral camp. He was the cornerstone of the world and the pillar of the human clan. But almost being assimilated by the order was still a huge mistake for him. To some extent, under the shadow of the order, King Wei had caused a crack in the neutral camp that couldn't be repaired until now. That was exactly what Lin Shi was asking. If King Wei had accommodated a divine form of His Majesty, Then as Xianyuan Wushang had said, with this divine form, King Wei couldn't be polluted by chaos or assimilated by order. As the founder of the neutral camp, if even a divine form of His Majesty could be polluted, it meant that the human clan had either become a chaotic shadow creature or an order creature that abided by absolute order. But none of this happened. How many terminations have you experienced? Xianyuan Wushang suddenly asked. Lin Shi subconsciously narrowed his eyes and said lightly, I haven't experienced it yet. I haven't, Xianyuan Wushang murmured to himself. His eyes were a little envious. So you can be called Lin Shi, the god of war can be called Lin Xianyuan, and the human emperor of the imperial palace is still Wang Fuxing? But there are some things that you should already be qualified to know. After the terminations, are you still Lin Shi? Lin Shi was stunned for a while and didn't speak. He couldn't answer this question. There were too many possibilities after the terminations. It was very likely that there would be no Lin Shi and everything would end. It was also possible that he would come back again. But at that time, he would be Lin Shi, but not completely Lin Shi. His father and his grandfather might become one person, or they might exist separately, but they would no longer be Lin Xianyuan and Wang Fuxing. After the terminations, the generations would gradually become chaotic, just like the relationship between the eldest princess and Xianyuan Wushang. They should be good friends, but now they couldn't tell whether Feng Qingwu was Xianyuan Wushang's sister or aunt. Everything would be distorted, and memories would gradually deviate. Many things would be forgotten, buried, and completely disappeared. Some so-called truths had long since lost their answers. Just like Li Tianlan now. Everyone in the space-time corridor and the God of War's realm firmly believed that Li Tianlan was the original His Majesty's new identity after many terminations. The camp had already confirmed that His Majesty had died. However, he could no longer remember when and why His Majesty had fallen. Lin Shi frowned and said softly, You mean, you don't remember? There is very little information in this area, and the memories we left are relatively faint. We don't even know if it's true or not. According to our guess, King Wei should have been assimilated by the order not long after His Majesty died. Given King Wei's character, it's not difficult to guess what he would do. King Wei was already very strong at that time. The entire order camp seemed to have suffered heavy losses after the battle with His Majesty, so King Wei made them miserable. Under such circumstances, the #1 expert of the order camp at that time barely sealed King Wei at the cost of a seriously injured arm, and then died not long after. No one could remember how long it had been since King Wei was sealed. In short, it was not like the legend in Zhongzhou State. A long time had gradually eroded his will. When he was in a trance, a demon of the order camp simulated and replaced one or some of His Majesty's fate nodes. He transferred a small part of His Majesty's fate to another genius of the order camp at that time in a very short time. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly paused. Lin Shi listened attentively and subconsciously asked, And then? Isn't it similar to the story in Zhongzhou State? With the trance of fate, King Wei mistook someone else for someone else in his confusion. That genius of the order camp at that time only used some very small help to gain King Wei's trust, such as helping him remove the seal that actually couldn't last for long. With King Wei's level, he could quickly detect the abnormality in the other's fate, but it was too late. Lin Shi added softly. After a long silence, Xianyuan Wushang gnashed his teeth and said, That bitch. Lin Shi was silent. The person he was talking about was no longer information. That person was now one of the strongest in the order camp. He had tampered with the fate of his student and temporarily linked His Majesty's fate with that of his student. After gaining King Wei's trust for a short time, he gave King Wei a gift. It was a poison covered in honey, a famous divine weapon in the order camp. That thing directly bound King Wei's soul. So even though his student was far from being a match for the seriously injured King Wei couldn't hurt him. He didn't even need to do anything. All he had to do was say a few words and King Wei's soul would be twisted in extreme pain, unable to resist. King Wei was assimilated into order. It was at that time that it officially began. He had no choice but to escort that student all the way to the neutral camp, through the star field of the chaotic camp, and finally returned to order. He watched as that student set foot on the peak. Lin Shi stood silently for a while and finally said, "No matter what, King Wei is finally back." "You don't understand. Because you haven't experienced it," Xianyuan Wushang said in a low voice. At that time, King Wei escorted that bitch's student through the neutral camp and the chaotic camp. His Majesty had fallen, and my father hadn't fully integrated with His Majesty's authority. The situation in the neutral camp was chaotic. At that time, many rumors said that the bitch's student was the return of a peak figure in the order camp. As long as he killed him and got his core, he could set foot on the peak of the order camp while maintaining the neutral camp's position, just like Her Highness Qin Weibai. In the chaotic situation, there would always be people who wanted to take risks. Countless forces wanted to capture that student, but in fact, it was tantamount to targeting and making things difficult for King Wei. King Wei killed some blind people, which made his position a little awkward. Now there are rumors in the legends that King Wei bullied the weak and feared the strong, and would often call for help. Many people in the central state ridiculed this. But in reality, King Wei killed a few small people, hoping that the neutral camp would wake up. But the result was worse and worse, and even some people that King Wei knew appeared. How could he deal with such people? He could only use the excuse that he was seriously injured and was no match for the other side, so he asked the people of the order camp to come forward. But the result was also not good. He stood in the order camp and called for help from the order camp. No one cared about what he thought, only the result. So countless forces thought that King Wei betrayed the camp, and their hostility toward him was unprecedentedly strong. And the order camp frequently took action to solve the problem, and gradually became a little dissatisfied with the existence of King Wei. Lin Xianyuan was silent for a while. Then he smiled bitterly. So in this situation, that bitch reversed the camp's hostility toward King Wei and turned it against him. So, another King Wei, who was exactly the same as him but was fundamentally different, was born. It was a fake King Wei who was the same as King Wei in appearance, internal, energy form, and combat power. For each other's survival, they fought from the neutral camp to the chaos camp, and then to the order camp. At that time, the idea of the order camp was undoubtedly to kill the real King Wei and let the fake King Wei replace him and become the strongest divine weapon of the order camp. But this plan failed in the end, and the fake King Wei was killed by the order camp's peak figures, while the real King Wei continued to escort that student. But this point, only King Wei and the important figures of the order camp knew that the dead King Wei was a fake. No one else knew, not even the other higher-ups of the order camp, let alone the people of the neutral camp. Most importantly, King Wei had accumulated a lot of hostility from the neutral camp, and he couldn't prove his innocence at all. The order camp made him return to the neutral camp because they wanted to see internal chaos in the neutral camp. Fortunately, at that time, His Majesty ascended to the throne? Lin Shi asked. I don't remember clearly. Xianyuan Wushang thought for a moment, then shook his head and smiled. Before my father ascended to the throne, there should have been a long period of struggle. Facing the hostility of his own people, he didn't explain anything and just protected the entire neutral camp behind him. He fought to the death against the order camp and the chaos camp, accumulating more and more hidden injuries. This can be said to be the foreshadowing of his death. This turbulent situation continued until my father grasped the authority left behind by His Majesty and successfully ascended to the throne. My father found a divine form that His Majesty had left behind, and King Wei took the initiative to use his own soul to contain that divine form. Everyone knew that if he leaned towards the order camp or the chaos camp, it would be impossible to contain that divine form. It was also at that time that King Wei regained his innocence, but not long after, he died. Lin Shi listened in a daze, somewhat understanding. The divine form that contained His Majesty was after King Wei returned from the order camp? This is the only explanation, Xianyuan Wushang said. Xianyuan Wushang said, but no one remembers the specific details. Lin Shi shook his head as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he didn't say anything. You're about to cast a divine form, aren't you? No, some time ago, It seemed that you already had your first divine form, but in the end, it was not confirmed. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly asked. I'm already casting the prototype of the third divine form. My 3 divine forms are all at the beginning stage, and they are all prototypes. Lin Shi said softly. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a moment, then looked at Lin Shi and said, Then what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of death? Who knows which divine form His Majesty will fuse with? Lin Shi said slowly. He paused for a moment, then continued, But you're right. If King Wei and His Majesty can deal with Jiang Shangyu, it will indeed save a lot of trouble and make up for our previous mistakes. We should do something for His Majesty and King Wei. Xianyuan Wushang looked at the transparent screen in front of him. On the screen, King Wei was still standing quietly, as if thinking about something. What Wuyo pursues is the greatest freedom, so it won't smoothly fuse with King Wei. Xianyuan Wushang said. There will be a fight. Lin Shi's voice was calm and indifferent. Once he had made up his mind, he had already cast aside all his worries in the shortest time possible. This is actually a good thing for you. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, The war god sent you here to face His Majesty not only to help you break through and reach the peak faster, but also to let His Majesty personally end you. That way, at least you can return in the next reincarnation, and maybe you will gain more by facing His Majesty's half-divine form in advance. Lin Shi's pupils slowly contracted and condensed into a single pupil, which looked increasingly deep and serene. I know. He said something in a low voice. We don't know the specific state of Wuyo and that half-divine form, but we're almost sure that this battle won't be easy. Xianyuan Wushang paused, then said seriously, So before we set off, we need a specific battle plan. This also meant that they had to have a very detailed understanding of each other's abilities. No one was unfamiliar with this kind of teamwork. They had gone through a long period of time and countless battles, so they didn't need to cultivate tacit understanding at all. They could completely find a tacit understanding of each other. Lin Shi nodded expressionlessly and said, That's right. Chapter 1131. When the apostle walked in, there was still a clear trace of confusion on his face. Until now, he still didn't know why Lin Shi decided to meet with Xianyuan Wushang. The war god's realm and the space-time corridor did have the same general standpoint. When they needed each other's support, no matter who it was, they would not hesitate. But in private, the real relationship between the 2 parties or even the 3 parties was really not harmonious. The former's high degree of agreement was an inevitable choice in the face of life and death. The latter, on the other hand, was a real dispute of interests. Xianyuan Wushang had suffered a big loss in the hands of Lin Shi's mother. When they met in Miracle City, they did not fight. Instead, they talked happily and conspired for a long time. In the apostle's view, this was quite incredible. The virtual screen in front of Xianyuan Wushang and Lin Shi was still on. The images of Li Tianlan and Wei Wang became the 2 largest screens. The man and the sword in the screen were very quiet. The apostle took a deep look at the screen in the room and bowed deeply to the man and the sword in the screen, solemnly and respectfully. In their hearts, the man and the sword in front of them were indeed worthy of respect. The former was indeed a tyrant that had never been seen before in the history of the human race, and there would never be another like him in the future. The latter had also been forced to join another camp, and they had indeed done so. However, no one was perfect, and no one could erase their contributions to the human race. Your Highness. After silently bowing to Li Tianlan and Wu Qing, the apostle turned around and nodded to Lin Shi. Call Saint back. Lin Shi nodded and said directly. At this time, Saint was already in the Wang family of Beihai with Wang Xingxiao to investigate the specific situation of Wang Tianzong. Reviving Wang Tianzong was what they had to do. At this time, they were still at the stage of understanding the situation. In this situation, it was not difficult for Saint to escape. The apostle nodded and gently raised his hand. The entire hotel turned into countless virtual lines in an instant. The virtual quantum network instantly covered the whole Zhongzhou state. What's the matter? The apostle's voice sounded directly. His Highness is looking for you. If you have nothing to do, come as soon as possible. The apostle said calmly. Inside a secret laboratory of the Wang family of Beihai, Saint answered, raised his wrist, and pressed a small button on a wristwatch on his wrist. Most of the abilities of a holy disciple were focused on healing, recovery, and defense. This was the authority of the Order faction. There were very few humans who could reach the level of a holy disciple. This was also the reason why it was impossible for a top army to have 2 holy disciples. No force would be so extravagant and waste their resources. In theory, an apostle could completely affect the situation of a large-scale interstellar war, and a saint could similarly save the situation of a large-scale interstellar war. Compared to the destructive power of an apostle, a saint was the most welcomed support and partner of every faction. This meant that they had near-permanent battle endurance. But the saints also had a huge flaw. They lacked powerful head-on combat ability and mobility. Especially in a real environment like Miracle City, if one didn't have a teammate like Apostle or a similar item, it was impossible to roam such a long distance. The saint's wristwatch was a virtual coordinate that the apostle had given her that could be used infinitely. Her pale fingers pressed the button on the wristwatch, and the light in the laboratory of the Wang family of Beihai was instantly distorted. The figure of Saint directly turned into a string of data that shuttled freely in the virtual world. The next second, her figure appeared in the room of the Yuzhou Hotel and reassembled into her original appearance. Saint nodded slightly. Her feet just stood in the hotel room. Before she could speak, Lin Shi, who never liked to talk nonsense, directly said, "Get ready. We'll go to the headquarters of the Lin clan and help King Wei take down Worryless." Get ready? Saint was a little confused. King Wei was in a very bad state now. The carefree state was also the lowest point of the lowest point. What was there to prepare for? And His Highness actually wanted them to attack together? Don't be careless. He's weak, but he's also a part of King Wei. And I just learned that Heartless is King Wei's body, Worryless is King Wei's core, and Worryless. To some extent, it's a part of King Wei's emotions and thoughts. Plus, His Majesty Li Tianlan is half of the divine form. You know what this means. If we're careless, it's very likely that we won't be able to come back this time. The bodies of Saint and Apostle shook for a very obvious moment. Divine form. His Majesty Li Tianlan's divine form. Completely out of instinct, their expressions suddenly became extremely serious. So to some extent, Worryless is more dangerous than Worryless. His essential state should be a little worse than Worryless, but as long as he can drive that half of the divine form, none of us is a match for him. Lin Shi said slowly. Drive the divine form in Miracle City? Apostle couldn't help but say. The divine form was also affected by the real environment, and its power would be sharply reduced. But no matter how reduced it was, if Worryless chose to drive the divine form in Miracle City, it was enough to cause great or even irreversible damage to Miracle City. If the situation really came to this point, not to mention him and Saint, even Lin Shi and Shenyuan Wushang would be sentenced to death. Of course not in Miracle City. Lin Shi glanced at him and said, "At the beginning of the battle, you're responsible for the space transfer and put the battlefield in the starry sky of other star areas. This way, it's easier for us to play and we don't have to worry about damage." The corners of Saint's mouth twitched, and he and Apostle revealed a bitter smile almost at the same time. That's right, after the space transfer, in the starry sky of other star areas, without the influence of the real environment of Miracle City, all of their means would be restored to their peak and there would be no more restrictions. It would be hundreds of millions of times better than it was now. This sounded very good. But if they really moved the battlefield, they wouldn't be the only ones who would not be affected by the real environment. Worryless and that half of the divine form would also not be affected by the real environment. As a part of King Guard, Worryless' rapid energy recovery method itself needed a kind of cosmic ray that was very special to Miracle City but was common in the starry sky. The prestige at the peak of the complete state was completely different from the current so-called murderous weapon and Heartless. There was no such thing as a recovery period. He could use all kinds of cosmic rays to replenish himself at any time, and he would never feel tired. He was simply a real perpetual motion machine. If in the starry sky, no one could be sure how much Worryless could recover after absorbing cosmic rays. The most important thing was that half of the divine form. The half of the divine form that belonged to the first majesty under the starry sky. In the real environment, this half of the divine form could at most exert the combat power close to that of the chosen one. But once it left the real environment, Apostle and Saint couldn't imagine what they would face. Which divine form of His Majesty merged with Worryless? Apostle took a deep breath and asked softly. My memory is a little fuzzy. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head and said, if there is no accident, that half of the divine form is very likely to be a catastrophe. A catastrophe, the apostle muttered to himself in a somewhat stupefied manner. Saint glanced at him and seemed to feel some sympathy. Are you sure it's not Jiodi? Lin Shi asked seriously and solemnly. I can confirm it. Xianyuan Wushang nodded and said, Jiodi should be in the depths of Her Highness Qin Weibai's consciousness now. This is probably the only divine form whose whereabouts are clearly known. Lin Shi's face relaxed slightly, and he glanced at Apostle. Everyone was looking at Apostle. The legend about the catastrophe should be spread in the realm of war gods. So, if it is difficult, I suggest a war of attrition. Even if Worryless cooperates with a single divine form, it will not be really perfect. There are still flaws. A war of attrition is the safest way. A war of attrition. Apostle murmured and looked at Xianyuan Wushang as if he wanted to scold him. Finally, he relied on his absolute strong willpower to control himself. He took 2 deep breaths and said slowly, I suspect that you are targeting me, but I have no evidence. So? Xianyuan Wushang raised his eyebrows. Apostle narrowed his eyes and looked at him seriously for a while. Suddenly he laughed and said, No so. If my existence makes the 9th prince feel uneasy, then I am honored. You think too much. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, This is the time-space corridor. We don't need to feel uneasy about an apostle. Apostle looked deeply at Xianyuan Wushang, and then at Lin Shi. He said softly, Your Highness, I am fine. Lin Shi grunted and looked at Xianyuan Wushang. I am not familiar with the time-space corridor. Give me the coordinates. The universe seemed vast, but finding a suitable coordinate was not easy. There were no civilizations near Miracle City. This place itself was a sword formation, and it was extremely exquisite. Lin Shi and the others would not start a war here unless they wanted to commit suicide. Outside of Miracle City's sword formation, the time-space corridor was already covered in the flames of war. A large number of resource planets were also firmly protected. There were not many places like this that did not destroy resources and did not attract the attention of other places. Xianyuan Wushang raised his eyebrows and asked Apostle, What do you want? Big enough. It must be big enough. Apostle's voice was very calm, but it carried a trace of restraint and arrogance that everyone could clearly see. Catastrophe was one of the divine forms of the martial path. Experts in the field of the apostle could be said to be experts in dealing with experts of the martial path. They had a strong restraining effect on the martial path. Everyone knew that apostle would be the main force in this battle, so they naturally had to create the best conditions for him. As expected of one of the oldest apostles in the war god realm. His family is indeed rich. Xianyuan Wushang gave him a thumbs up. The apostle said calmly, I can't compare to the seniors in the time-space corridor. But the fire seed has been in good condition recently, so I can squander it for once. After a pause, Apostle smiled and looked at Xianyuan Wushang. I will move a part of the headquarters here. You don't have any objections, do you? Chapter 1132. Xianyuan Wushang knew better than anyone what an apostle's headquarters meant, so while the other party's words seemed like a joke, it was in fact an extremely serious matter. The apostle was talking about a part of the headquarters. But even a part of it was a great test of Xianyuan Wushang's ability to choose the battlefield. Xianyuan Wushang seriously thought for a while, then suddenly raised his palm. Droplets of pure, almost transparent light shone from his palm and gathered in front of them, finally forming a light screen. Countless shining spots of light gathered on the light screen at an unimaginable number. A large number of spots of light began to move away, and a portion of the spots of light rearranged themselves, finally forming a huge oval whirlpool that was slowly rotating. Lin Shi raised his eyebrows slightly. "This is the revolving galaxy?" Xianyuan Wushang grunted in response. What he was displaying now was a detailed star map of the space-time corridor in the starry sky. The complete star map was blocked the moment it appeared, leaving only this domain called the revolving galaxy. The so-called spiraling galaxy was the Lagniaceae supercluster in Miracle City's scientific research, while the Virgo galaxy, which was more familiar to the public, was a part of it. The local galaxy, which was known to the public, was a part of Virgo. The Milky Way, which was very familiar to everyone, was also a part of the local galaxy, and the solar system, which was more familiar to everyone, was a part of the Milky Way. The space-time corridor did not accept the name Miracle City, but officially designated this supercluster as a star field, and named it the spiraling galaxy. Even in the entire territory of the space-time corridor, this area, which had a diameter of trillions of light years, could be considered a first-class area of the space-time corridor. There was bound to be a peak figure presiding over it, and there were several saints or apostles like Xianyuan Wushang. This was already the back of the space-time corridor. Although it was still affected by the flames of war, it was relatively calm. This was also the node from the space-time corridor to the war god realm, so both sides were relatively familiar with each other. One of the main reasons Xianyuan Wushang chose this place as the battlefield was relatively close to the war god realm. Xianyuan Wushang's fingers slowly moved. The galaxy clusters in the rotating Milky Way streaked past one after another. The stars in the sky were constantly shining, followed by the galaxy clusters, and then the galaxy clusters. On the screen formed by the clear light, the vortex quickly zoomed in and out. The apostles' eyes narrowed slightly, a fine radiance flickering within them. Less than a second later, Xianyuan Wushang already began to laugh. "Her Highness the eldest princess is still watching this place. If you don't want to die, it's best if you behave yourself." The apostle stared blankly for a moment before releasing a cold snort. Although he did not speak, the light in his eyes had completely disappeared. Although Xianyuan Wushang could search for a suitable battlefield very quickly, the apostle could completely record the appearance of the star domain Xianyuan Wushang had revealed in the shortest amount of time. He had used the network to invade the entire star field and obtain the most detailed information about them. This wasn't very useful in the grand scheme of things, but when the war god realm and the space-time corridor clashed, this information could play an extremely crucial role. Feng Qingwu didn't allow him to use those abilities in Miracle City, so this kind of record was naturally not allowed. Here then. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. What appeared in front of them was another vortex. Although it was not as magnificent as the spinning galaxy, it was still shocking. This was also an area that Lin Shi and the apostle were very familiar with. Whether it was Miracle City, the space-time corridor, or the war god realm's human imperial palace, they all used the same name for this place. The Milky Way galaxy. The battlefield that Xianyuan Wushang had locked onto was located at the edge of the Milky Way galaxy's halo. There were few planets, and there were no civilizations or resource planets. It was covered in a large amount of cosmic dust. It was a barren wasteland, and for the time being, it had not been affected by the flames of war. If he wanted to find a battlefield near Miracle City, this was the most suitable place. Xianyuan Wushang glanced at the apostle. The apostle raised his eyes and glanced at the battlefield on the screen. The entire process took less than half a second. Three-dimensional images began to form in his mind. His expression changed slightly, instantly becoming a little ugly and a little angry. "What's wrong?" Lin Shi sensed the apostle's abnormality. "I've already grasped the battlefield's coordinates. I can move at any time." The apostle glared at Xianyuan Wushang, his eyes blazing with anger. "Where is it?" Lin Shi asked indifferently. "The land of freedom." The apostle gnashed his teeth as he spoke word by word. Lin Shi's expression changed slightly, and he immediately fell silent. The land of freedom. For the war god realm and the human emperor palace, this term was not very good. When the term land of freedom appeared, Lin Shi had not yet been born. This was the place where the human emperor of the human emperor palace and the war god of the war god realm challenged great emperor Xianyuan of the time corridor for the first time after reaching the peak. The result was self-evident. The two of them joined forces, but they failed. And it was a crushing defeat. The battle lasted less than 2 seconds, and the war god and the human emperor were defeated without any room to fight back. This was the first time that the two of them fought for their freedom and not being bound by the time corridor. This kind of challenge was carried out a total of 3 times. The first 2 times, the two of them were defeated. But the third time, they didn't fight. Great Emperor Xianyuan of the time corridor recognized the independence of the war god and the human emperor, and then in the challenge that didn't result in a fight, he separated Miracle City. Xianyuan Wushang regarded this place as a battlefield. It couldn't be said that he had evil intentions, but it did make people a little uncomfortable. This was at least an unscrupulous prank. "Thank you." Lin Shi was silent for a long time, and then said without any emotion. "It was really uncomfortable here. But it was very close to the time corridor. If the apostle wanted to move the headquarters, it would undoubtedly be easier if it was closer." Xianyuan Wushang nodded casually. The expressionless Lin Shi slowly turned around and glanced at the apostle. "Let's go." The screen in the hotel bedroom disappeared completely. One after another, virtual lines enveloped everyone. A series of digitized figures disappeared in an instant. The next second, in the sky above the worry-free manor of the Lin clan, the apostle appeared directly with Lin Shi, Xianyuan Wushang, and the others. The moment the data quickly merged, the apostle's eyes lit up with a blue light. There seemed to be endless lightning flashing and rushing in his eyes. Time completely stopped. The entire worry-free manor was completely virtualized. At the moment when time stopped, the entire worry-free manor almost didn't exist at all, because this area had become a virtual world. In the virtual world, an ordinary-looking tree stood out from the rest. Time stopped. However, the tree seemed to have sensed something and suddenly began to shake violently. In the virtual world, reality was the most dazzling lighthouse. And for the neutral camp, Li Tianlan's original half-divine form was the most dazzling reality. The apostle, with lightning flashing in his eyes, pressed his hands down. In an instant, the violently struggling tree disappeared with all of them, as if it had never existed. The suspended time continued to pass. The whole process took less than a millisecond. The worry-free manor returned to reality again. No one could notice the 1 millisecond pause of time. But this manor was a millisecond slower than the whole world at this time. At the same time, 4,000 light-years away, in a barren land of freedom, the apostle, Xianyuan Wushang, Lin Shi, Xing Tian, and Saint appeared directly in the cosmic void where there was a lot of floating dust. There was only solemnity on Xianyuan Wushang's chubby face. He silently observed the surrounding situation and slowly turned his head. Then he saw the apostle who had also brought them here. F***CK. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly cursed. He pointed at the apostle. "Why are you here? What are you doing here?" Chapter 1133. Apostles were undoubtedly the main force of this battle. No one would doubt this. But when the battlefield shifted, Xianyuan Wushang couldn't help but be astonished to see him here. Apostle's initial level of authority in the starry sky was called Scholar. To some extent, this path belonged to the Order faction, and it largely determined the survival and death of the entire world. Their destructive power was undoubtedly number 1, and there was no doubt that they were extremely powerful. But corresponding to this powerful destructive power, their bodies were much weaker than anyone else's. Therefore, before reaching level 4 authority, Apart from a few rare existences, everyone on this path could be considered the most standard of trash. Only after reaching level 4 authority could they form initial combat power, and after reaching level 5 authority, they would completely erupt and become more and more powerful. But no matter how powerful they were, even if they reached the peak of this path and became the apocalypse, compared to other peak figures, their much weaker bodies were still a flaw that couldn't be considered a flaw. This flaw really existed, but almost no one could take advantage of it. At the level of apostles, they could completely not appear on any battlefield and still maintain extremely powerful combat power. Apostles were the 8th level authority of scholars, and it was also the peak of the authority that a neutral faction could use to the Order faction. At this level, as the main force, apostles didn't need to appear on any battlefield at all, but they could still cause absolute destruction on any battlefield. Their true bodies could do anything in any corner of the world, and they could play a huge role far away from the battlefield. The so-called weakness of a weak body was not a weakness at all in a situation where the enemy couldn't even find their true bodies. The authority of an apostle was definitely at the peak of the neutral faction. The war god realm had sent him here not only because he was Lin Shi's protector in the early days and had an extremely good relationship with Lin Shi, but also because the war god realm wanted to show off their power. In other words, standing in the position of an apostle could already represent the war god realm to show off their power to the outside world. Such a person was now sent here to be an introducer. Such extravagance! If it wasn't necessary, even the space-time corridor wouldn't do this. This meant the mobilization of countless resources and military power. According to the space-time corridor's intelligence, the apostle following Lin Shi had a specific position, and it was a very important position in the war god realm. Before coming to Miracle City, he was overseeing a star field. What kind of concept was a star field? For example, the galaxy they were currently in had a true diameter of nearly 1 trillion light-years. This was a medium to large star region. Under normal circumstances, such a star field would need a peak expert to oversee it, 3 to 5 lower-level assistants, and hundreds of millions of large armies and battleships that could occupy the entire starry sky. When it came to individuals, it would be an unimaginable number. This was the standard garrison size of a normal star field. Endless armies and battleships. And in that part of the planet where the apostles reside, but there were no such things in the domain. That star area was no smaller than the rotating Milky Way, but if all the garrisons in that star area were added up, there was only one person. The apostles. Not a single so-called human army had a deputy. He was alone. It was true that he wasn't a match for those at the pinnacle, but he was able to oversee a star field all by himself. The only answer was that he was an apostle. But now, the apostle's true body actually teleported. Was this man, who represented the power of the space-time corridor in the outside world, planning to commit suicide? Xianyuan Wushang silently looked at the apostle next to him. A saint's direct combat strength was at the bottom of all kinds of authorities. But facing an apostle who dared to teleport himself, Xianyuan Wushang felt that if the two of them fought, he might be able to seriously injure the apostle. The apostle stood next to Lin Shi and looked around the starry sky. He smiled faintly and said, "I'm more useful here. If Wu You is in a good state, perhaps just a wave of sword qi can seriously injure your true body." Xianyuan Wushang sneered in exasperation. The apostle turned his head and looked at Xianyuan Wushang seriously. After a while, he suddenly laughed. "Ninth Prince, which eye of yours saw that this is my true body?" Xianyuan Wushang was stunned and didn't know what to say for a moment. Not his true body. He is now completely worthy of the title given to him by the human race. They always call him the Peak Apostle. Not long ago, he set foot on the true peak that belongs to him. Lin Shi said softly. Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian were shocked at the same time. The apostle wasn't the peak. But the neutral camp had always been called the Peak Apostle. Those who were worthy of this title were all creatures of the neutral camp who had reached the extreme or were infinitely close to the extreme on the path of order. In other words, it was the 8-9 level of authority, or infinitely close to the 9 level of authority. There was once such a peak apostle in the space-time corridor a long time ago. That was his sister, who had fallen and hadn't returned. He didn't know if she could return or not. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a while and looked deeply at the apostle. "No wonder you are so confident. Congratulations." The apostle nodded. His true body was still on Earth. Perhaps he had already sneaked into the Lin clan's kitchen to enjoy the delicious food. This was just a manifestation of his consciousness clone. He could move to another target at any time. When his true body was far away from the battlefield, he would be in almost no danger. His gaze fell on the distant starry sky. There seemed to be nothing under the extremely distant starry sky. But everyone could feel that there was an incomparably majestic sword chi in that area that had begun to rapidly boil in the shortest time possible. Large amounts of cosmic dust in the surroundings were constantly turbulent. All kinds of invisible cosmic rays were rapidly withdrawn. They turned into incomparably dazzling streams of flowing light that converged toward that area. 2 incomparably bright rays of light shot over from afar. They were sharp, cold, and full of contempt and arrogance. Combined with Li Tianlan's original half-divine form, he was also constantly absorbing cosmic rays. King Wei's long-dormant consciousness directly awakened in an instant. Those 2 rays of light were King Wei's gaze. Facing that gaze, the apostle subconsciously narrowed his eyes. He took a deep breath and bowed slightly. His calm voice came from afar. "Apostle Lin Wushang, General Wei of the State of War Realm, Duke Wei, greets your highness. Prince of the War Realm, Lin Shi, greets your highness." Lin Shi also bowed slightly. "Deputy Commander of the War Realms Guard Army, Saint Han Wei, greets your highness." One voice after another was transmitted over. Xianyuan Wushang bowed slightly and said with a smile, "Ninth Prince of the Space-Time Corridor, Xianyuan Wushang, greets Uncle Wei." Xing Tian didn't say anything. In such a scene, he had the lowest authority and the lowest position. He had no right to speak at all. The endless void suddenly fluctuated for a moment. No sound came from there. But everyone's soul began to fluctuate at the same time. King Wei's will was clearly transmitted through the incomparably intense soul fluctuation. "Get lost." At the same time as the soul fluctuation, an incomparably dazzling sword light was transmitted. In an instant, the extremely dazzling sword light directly spread from one point to the entire starry sky, arriving in an instant. The apostle slowly stood up, reached out his hand, and snapped his fingers. A faint blue light suddenly shone from his pupils. The void was silently torn apart. The endless space kept boiling, and a large amount of cosmic dust kept twisting in the chaos. In everyone's sight, a metal planet many times larger than an ordinary star slowly appeared on the battlefield. There were no words, no orders, no communication. In the face of the approaching sword light, the torrent of steel instantly blotted out the sky and covered the sun. On the smooth surface of the metal planet, the mighty mechanical army under the control of the apostles' thoughts moved at full speed, rushing in the direction of the flying sword light. Millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. The mechanical warriors were endless. On the planet, densely packed torrents kept rising into the sky, more and more, and there was no end to them. This was the apostles' mechanical army. A mechanical army that belonged to him alone. Every soldier in the army could be considered as his creations. He was the creator of the entire mechanical army. And what he possessed was far more than just a mechanical army. This was also the source of his confidence in overseeing the entire star field alone. He didn't need an army made up of human armies. He didn't need complicated logistical supplies. His existence alone was equivalent to trillions of mechanical legions. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.